This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've been a sheriff in Clearwater County, Montana for almost 15 years, and I thought I knew every person in this community. It's not exactly a metropolis. 30,000 people spread across 3,500 square miles of mostly wilderness and small towns. Out here, we pride ourselves on looking out for each other. We have to. Winter storms can cut you off for days. Bears get into trash bins more often than raccoons, and the nearest major hospital is over an hour away. You learn to rely on your neighbors, and you learn who you can trust, or at least I thought I did. I met Robert Owens back in 2008, not long after he moved to Pinecrest. He bought that little blue ranch house on Cottonwood Lane, the one with the detached garage. Said he was a retired accountant from Washington State looking for peace and quiet. Nothing unusual about that. We get a lot of retirees who want to escape city life. Robert fit right in. He volunteered at the community center, joined the Rotary Club, and always showed up for town events. He was the kind of guy who would shovel his elderly neighbor's driveway without being asked. Quiet, but friendly. Always had a wave for me when I drove by on patrol. Hell, he even brought homemade cookies to the station every Christmas. For 3 years, Robert was the model citizen, not so much as a parking ticket. When I think about it now, maybe that should have been the first red flag. Nobody's that perfect. October 17th, 2011. I'll never forget that date as long as I live. I was just finishing my morning coffee when dispatch called. A hiker had found what looked like a shallow grave up in the national forest, about 20 miles from town. I remember sighing, thinking it was probably just some idiot who illegally dumped a deer carcass after hunting season. I was wrong, so goddamn wrong. The grave was about 5 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 3 feet deep. Carefully dug, with the dirt piled neatly to one side. Not the hasty work of a panicked killer, but something methodical. Inside was the body of a young woman, later identified as Melissa Carson, 26, a waitress from over in Jefferson County. She'd been missing for about 2 weeks. What struck me immediately was how familiar the killer must have been with the area. This wasn't just some random spot in the woods. It was accessible if you knew the old logging roads, but remote enough that you'd never stumble across it by accident. The kind of place only locals would know about. While my deputies secured the scene, I noticed something attached to a pine tree about 50 feet away. A trail camera, the kind hunters use to track deer. It was weathered, like it had been there a while. We bagged it as evidence, figuring maybe it caught something useful. That camera changed everything. Back at the station, our tech guy downloaded the images. The camera had been set to take one picture every 2 weeks, always at 3 in the morning. Weird timing, but it meant months of images. Most showed nothing but darkness and occasional wildlife. Then, in the most recent photos, we saw a figure, dark clothing, carrying what looked like a shovel and other tools. The image quality wasn't great, but something about the person's gait, the way they moved, it was familiar. I must have stared at that grainy image for 20 minutes before it hit me. Robert Owens, the friendly accountant from Cottonwood Lane. I didn't want to believe it. Maybe I was seeing things. But the more I looked, the more certain I became. We pulled his driver's license photo for comparison, studied the build, the way he walked. It matched. We got a search warrant for his house that same day. I remember standing on his porch, knocking on the door, my stomach in knots. Part of me was praying I was wrong, that there was some innocent explanation. Robert answered the door in his reading glasses, looking surprised to see me and 3 deputies on his doorstep. "Sheriff Reeves, is everything all right?" he asked, like he was genuinely concerned. I explained we had a warrant. He nodded calmly, like this was all a simple misunderstanding, and invited us in. The living room was ordinary, neat, organized, with landscape paintings on the walls and bookshelves filled with mystery novels. We started searching methodically, room by room. It was in the basement that we found the first disturbing signs. Behind a false wall, we discovered a small room that didn't appear in the house plans. Inside were journals, dozens of them, dating back 20 years. I opened one at random and felt my blood turn to ice. The entries detailed murders, 7 of them across 4 states, with dates, locations, and methods. Each description was cold, analytical, like he was writing up a business report rather than describing taking human lives. Some entries included small photographs of the victims, taken before and after death. In another hidden compartment, we found a makeshift darkroom. Inside were thousands of surveillance photos of people around town. Everyday folks going about their lives, completely unaware they were being watched. Teachers, store clerks, hikers, and me. There were hundreds of photos of me, at crime scenes, eating lunch at the diner, walking my dog, leaving the station late at night, some taken with a telephoto lens from a distance, others from just feet away. In one, I was standing at a gas pump, and I could see Robert's reflection in my truck window, holding the camera. He had been right there, and I never noticed. The most disturbing discovery came when we searched his desk. Robert Owens wasn't his real name. We found documentation for at least 4 other identities: Richard Owens, Ronald Overton, Raymond Olson. His original name was Timothy Wells, a former evidence technician for the Seattle PD, who disappeared in 1994 after being questioned about missing evidence in several unsolved murder cases. For 20 years, this man had been moving from community to community, integrating himself, gaining trust, and killing. But it wasn't just the murders that were his game. He was obsessed with the investigations that followed. We found visitor passes to numerous police departments, volunteer badges for law enforcement community programs, and high-end police scanners. In one journal, he wrote about the thrill of standing next to investigators who were hunting him, offering them coffee or sympathy while they remained completely unaware. When we finished the search, I went back upstairs to where 2 deputies were watching Robert. He sat calmly at his kitchen table, hands folded in front of him. He looked up at me, and I'll never forget the expression on his face. Not fear or anger, but something like satisfaction. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out, Dan," he said, using my first name like we were friends. "I was standing right next to you, and you never even noticed me." A chill ran through me as I realized he was talking about the Carson crime scene. He had been there, among the onlookers, watching us work. I remembered him now, offering bottled water to the deputies, asking concerned questions about what happened, playing the role of the helpful citizen. "How many times?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He smiled slightly. "Every time, every single investigation. I was always there, watching you not catch me. That day at Miller's Creek when you found Sarah Jenkins, I helped you string the crime scene tape. The Paulson boy last spring, I was at every community meeting taking notes in the back row. I even brought those cookies you liked to the volunteer search party." Over the following weeks, the full extent of his crimes came to light. 11 murders across 4 states, 20 years of meticulous planning, surveillance, and deception. The psychological evaluation described him as a classic psychopath who viewed his murders as intellectual exercises. It wasn't just about killing. It was about watching the aftermath, inserting himself into the investigations, and taking pride in his ability to hide in plain sight. The worst part? If that trail camera hadn't caught him by pure chance, he'd still be out there, still attending community potlucks, still bringing cookies to the station, still watching. This case changed me, changed how I see people, changed how I do my job. We developed a training program for rural law enforcement that we call the Watchman Protocol. The name comes from something we found in one of Robert's journals. I'm not just watching them. I'm watching those who think they're watching out for them. I've been a sheriff for 15 years in a county where everybody knows everybody, or so I thought. Now I look at familiar faces and wonder what's behind their eyes. I check my rearview mirror more often. I notice when someone stands too close. Because the most terrifying thing isn't the stranger lurking in the shadows. It's the monster who lives next door, who waves good morning, who knows your habits, your weaknesses, your blind spots. The monster who watches you fail to see him day after day, year after year, and smiles. Story 2. I still can't explain what happened to me last year at that truck stop in western Oklahoma. I've been driving big rigs for 17 years now, made thousands of hauls across this country, seen some weird shit on the road, but nothing comes close to what went down that night. It was September 19th, just past 2 in the morning. I was hauling refrigerated pharmaceuticals from Nashville to northern Arizona, a route I've done dozens of times. My Freightliner Cascadia was running smooth until somewhere on I-40 in western Oklahoma, when the engine started making this weird knocking sound. Then the check engine light came on, and the rig started losing power. I pulled over to check it out, but couldn't see anything obvious, in the dark. I knew I wasn't going to make it much further, so I limped the truck to the next exit, a little place called Saya. Not much there, just a gas station, and this old truck stop called Richardson's Truck Haven. When I pulled in, the place looked half abandoned. It was this long, single-story building with rooms along one side and a small office convenience store at the front. There were only 3 other trucks in the lot, which was weird even for that time of night. The office had a dim light on, so I went in. This older lady was behind the counter, Doris, according to her name tag. She looked like she'd been working nights at truck stops since before I was born. "Engine trouble?" she asked, before I even said anything. "Yeah, how'd you know?" "Nobody stops here at this hour unless they have to," she said, not looking up from her crossword puzzle. "Only got 1 room left, number 36, end of the building." I didn't care which room. I just needed a place to crash until morning when I could figure out what was wrong with my truck. I paid cash, took the key, an actual metal key, not a card, and headed down to my room. As soon as I opened the door to room 36, I felt this blast of cold air. It was strange because it had been a warm September night, probably still in the 70s outside. I figured the AC was cranked up, but when I checked the unit under the window, it wasn't even running. The room was basic: queen bed with a faded bedspread, small bathroom, old TV bolted to the dresser. But there was something else that caught my eye: this antique wooden radio sitting on the nightstand. It looked completely out of place, like something from the 50s or 60s. I remember thinking it was weird that they'd leave something that looked kind of valuable in a cheap truck stop room. I set my overnight bag down and tried to adjust the heat, but the thermostat didn't seem to work. The cold was really getting to me. I could actually see my breath now. I grabbed the extra blanket from the closet, and was about to call the front desk when that radio suddenly turned on by itself. There was static at first, then a man's voice came through, sounding distant and hollow. "This is a call for assistance. Driver in trouble. Room 36. Need help immediately. September 19th. Driver in room 36. It freaked me out. I went over to turn it off, but before I could touch it, the radio went silent on its own. I figured it must be some old CB channel bleeding through or something, though I couldn't explain how an unplugged antique radio was working at all. I was exhausted, so I decided to just try and get some sleep. I was just dozing off when there was a knock at my door. I checked my phone. It was 3:15 in the morning. "Who is it?" I called out. "Hey buddy, got your message on the CB, said you needed help in room 36. I never sent any message. I didn't even have my CB on. I got up and looked through the peephole, but couldn't see anyone clearly. Just a dark figure. "I didn't call for help," I said through the door. "You've got the wrong guy. This is room 36, ain't it? Got a message clear as day. Driver in trouble, room 36, Richardson's." Something felt really wrong. I decided to call the front desk. Doris answered on the second ring. "Yeah, room 36? She sounded like she'd been expecting my call. "There's someone at my door saying I called for help on CB. I didn't call anyone." There was a long pause on the line. "Is your room cold, Mr. Mitchell?" I hadn't told her my last name when I checked in. And how did she know about the temperature? "Yeah, freezing actually. How'd you—" "Listen to me carefully," she cut me off. "Don't open that door. I'm calling 911. "What's going on?" I demanded. Doris sighed heavily. "This has happened before. September 19th, 1976. Driver named Howard Welch stayed in that room. Called the front desk, complaining his room was getting unnaturally cold. Then he said someone was knocking, claiming they'd received his CB call for help. Howard was found frozen to death the next morning, even though it was over 70 degrees that night. My blood ran cold. The knocking at the door got louder. "That's bullshit," I said, but my voice was shaking. "You're messing with me." I wish I was. After Howard, there've been others. Not every year, but always on September 19th, always in room 36. I shouldn't have rented it to you tonight, but the owner insists we keep it open. The radio suddenly came on again, louder this time. "Warren Mitchell, driver in room 36, September 19th, just like Howard, just like all the others." It knew my name. How the hell did it know my name? The temperature dropped even further. Frost was forming on the inside of the windows now. The knocking became pounding, the whole door shaking in its frame. "I'm getting out of here," I told Doris, and hung up. I grabbed my bag and yanked open the door, ready to push past whoever was there, but the hallway was empty. No one in sight. But when I stepped out, I felt the cold follow me, like it was attached to me somehow. I ran toward the parking lot, but when I got outside, I stopped dead in my tracks. The entire parking lot was covered in ice, thick, bluish ice, even though it had been clear when I pulled in just an hour before. My truck was coated in it, icicles hanging from the mirrors and grille. That's when I saw him, standing next to my frozen rig. A man in an old-style trucker jacket, the kind with the striped collar popular in the 70s. His skin had this blue tinge to it, and his eyes were like looking into empty space. "Been waiting for you, Warren," he said, his voice exactly like the one from the radio. "Been waiting for you just like I waited for Howard and all the others. Room 36 gets lonely." I backed away. "Who the fuck are you?" "Just a driver who took the wrong room on the wrong night." He smiled, showing teeth that looked like icicles. "September 19th. My night. The night I come back for company. He started walking toward me, leaving footprints of frost on the pavement. I turned and ran back toward the office. Looking over my shoulder, I saw him still coming, not running, just walking at a steady pace, grinning that horrible frozen grin. When I burst into the office, Doris was on the phone with what I assumed was 911. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "He's here," I gasped. "Some guy with a blue face in a 70s jacket." Doris dropped the phone. "Howard," she whispered. "That's Howard. He comes back every year on the night he died, looking for someone to take with him." I looked out the office window. The entire truck stop was now engulfed in what looked like a localized blizzard. Snow and ice everywhere, swirling around just this property, while the rest of the Oklahoma landscape beyond remained clear and warm. "What the hell is happening?" I demanded. "I don't know exactly," Doris said, "but from what I've pieced together from the old records, Howard was headed to Flagstaff that night in '76 when his truck broke down, just like yours. He took room 36, reported it getting cold, then said someone was at his door claiming they'd gotten his CB call for help. The police report said he'd frozen to death, but the medical examiner couldn't explain how it happened when the temperature that night never dropped below 70 degrees. And this happens every September 19th? Not every year, just when someone takes room 36 on that date. Sometimes we go 5, 6 years without an incident. The owner keeps that room open, says it's nonsense, but I've seen it too many times." Through the window, I could see the blue-faced figure, Howard, moving toward the office, frost spreading on the glass where he looked in. I noticed the CB radio behind the counter suddenly crackle to life. "Driver in trouble, room 36, coming to help." Howard's voice came through, but his lips weren't moving as he stared at us through the window. Doris and I stayed in that office all night. The blizzard raged around the truck stop, the temperature dropping so low that pipes burst in the walls. Howard remained outside, sometimes disappearing into the storm, sometimes pressing his frozen face against the windows, always grinning. Then, as suddenly as it started, at exactly 6:19 in the morning, I remember checking my phone. Everything stopped. The ice, the snow, the cold, all of it just vanished. One minute the place was an Arctic nightmare. The next it was a normal, slightly run-down truck stop in the early morning Oklahoma sun. When I went outside, my truck was completely normal. No ice, no frost. I popped the hood and couldn't find a thing wrong with the engine. It started right up. I didn't stick around. I thanked Doris, who looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight, and got the hell out of there. I completed my delivery to Arizona, but I changed my routes after that. I don't drive through western Oklahoma anymore. The weirdest part is that every September 19th since then, no matter where I am, my truck's CB radio activates on its own, always at 3:15 in the morning, always broadcasting the same message: "Driver in trouble, room 36, coming to help." I've replaced the radio, even switched trucks completely, but it still happens. It's like a part of Howard is still with me, reminding me that something waits at Richardson's Truck Haven for the next driver who takes that last room at the end of the building. I still can't explain what happened that night. I've looked up the history of the place, tried to find records of Howard Welch, but there's almost nothing to be found. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but then September 19th comes around again, and my CB crackles to life with that same hollow voice, and I know it was real. Whatever's in room 36, it's still there, waiting. To Story 3. I've never been the type to share personal stuff online, but I need to get this out. It's been over 9 years, and I still check my attic every week. Still get up in the middle of the night when I hear the slightest creak. Still can't sleep without my service weapon within reach. My name is Diane. I've been a police officer in Smithtown, Long Island for almost 15 years now. October of 2014 started like any other month. Domestic disputes, drunk drivers, the occasional B&E. Nothing I couldn't handle. Then Janet Cooper called in. Janet was a high school English teacher, lived alone in one of those developments backing onto the woods on the east side. Quiet lady, never caused trouble. She reported hearing footsteps on her back deck and scratching at her sliding door. I took the call myself. Standard procedure. Checked the perimeter. Found some scuff marks, but nothing conclusive. Told her to call back if anything else happened. I figured it was probably raccoons or teenagers messing around. 3 days later, she called again. Same thing. This time I noticed what looked like shoe prints in the soft dirt by her back fence, leading toward the woods. I took photos, filed a report, told dispatch to keep an eye on the area. Then similar calls started coming in from all over Suffolk County's eastern townships. All women. All living alone or just with kids, all with properties backing onto wooded areas. The pattern was so obvious it made my skin crawl. The calls were mostly the same: scratching sounds, footsteps outside, occasionally reports of someone testing door handles or windows. Nothing ever stolen, no break-ins, just presence, the feeling of being watched. By early November, the calls evolved. Women started reporting silent phone calls, picking up to hear nothing but breathing or the sound of someone just there. I started compiling a case file, connecting the dots. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my gut. Then on November 30th, everything escalated. Melissa Donovan, night shift nurse at Good Samaritan, came home after a 12-hour shift to find something that still gives me nightmares. Her furniture had been slightly rearranged. Couch moved 3 inches to the left, kitchen chairs at different angles, picture frames tilted. Nothing dramatic enough to scream break-in, but enough that she noticed. And on her kitchen table, a fucking Polaroid photo of herself, sleeping, in her bed, from the night before. I was first on scene. I'll never forget the look on her face, that hollow, violated expression. We dusted for prints, checked for entry points. Her sliding door had tool marks, like someone had popped it off the track and then carefully put it back. We pulled her phone records and found something that made my blood run cold. At 3:15 a.m., while she was sleeping, someone had used her landline to call Janet Cooper, our first victim. I started working overtime, poring over every report, looking for connections between victims. My sergeant wanted to hand it off to the county detectives, but I couldn't let it go. These women were terrified, and for good reason. Someone was toying with them, invading their spaces, watching them sleep. It felt personal. Then it became personal. I started getting the calls myself. First at my desk at the station, picking up to silence, then on my cell. Always from blocked numbers or public phones. I changed my number twice. It didn't matter. The third time I changed it, I got a call within hours. When I answered, instead of silence, I heard whispering. "I know it's you responding, Diane. My name isn't public information. My number is unlisted." I started sleeping with my gun next to my pillow. We caught a break in mid-December when a patrol unit spotted a suspicious vehicle parked near Janet Cooper's place at 4 in the morning. Officer ran the plates, registered, to Thomas Grayson, former emergency dispatcher from the county's central office. I recognized the name immediately. He'd been fired 2 years earlier for inappropriate conduct, getting too personal with female callers, asking for their addresses, calling them back after their emergencies. Red flags everywhere. We got a warrant for his apartment the next day. What we found still haunts me. Maps of the county with our victims' homes circled in red. Surveillance photos taken through windows. Audio recordings of their 911 calls. A police scanner. A collection of women's hair ties and earrings. Trophies, I realized later, taken from their homes during his visits. But the worst part? I found a folder with my name on it. Photos of me, leaving my house, walking my dog, shopping at the grocery store. Notes about my schedule when I was alone, what windows I left unlocked. The level of detail made me physically sick. I had to step outside to throw up in the bushes. I drove home in a daze that night, mind racing. We had Grayson in custody, but something felt unfinished. The evidence from his apartment showed months of stalking, but the case seemed too neat, too sudden. I couldn't shake the feeling we were missing something. I pulled into my driveway around 11:30 that night. I remember checking my rearview mirror obsessively, scanning the street before getting out of my car. The porch light I always left on was off. I drew my weapon, approached slowly. My front door was ajar, just slightly, maybe half an inch. I radioed for backup, then entered, training kicking in despite my pounding heart. Nothing seemed disturbed at first glance. Then I noticed the furniture. My coffee table had been moved about 6 inches from its normal position. The throw pillows on my couch were rearranged. The dining chairs were at different angles. On my kitchen counter was a manila envelope. Inside were photos of me, dozens of them, spanning months. Me sleeping in my bed, me in the shower, me getting dressed, all taken from inside my house. The timestamp on one was from 2 nights ago. I swept through every room with my gun drawn, checking closets, under the bed, behind shower curtains. Nothing. I was standing in my living room, shaking uncontrollably, when my eyes drifted upward to the ceiling. The access panel to my attic was slightly ajar. Backup arrived minutes later. 2 officers searched the attic while I stood in the yard, unable to go back inside. They found a sleeping bag, food wrappers, and a bucket used as a toilet. He'd been living above me for God knows how long, watching me through a small hole drilled into my bedroom ceiling. The final piece fell into place when Janet Cooper called the station the next morning, voice trembling. She'd gone up to check her attic after hearing about my experience. She found the same setup, sleeping bag, food, waste bucket, and a hole drilled directly above her bed. We arrested Grayson formally in January 2015. The search of his apartment yielded evidence connecting him to 14 victims across Suffolk County. The psychiatric evaluation revealed he suffered from erotomania. He believed he was protecting us by watching us sleep. In his twisted mind, he was our guardian angel. He was sentenced to 25 years without parole. I sat in the courtroom for every day of the trial, watching his face. He never looked at the other victims, only at me, with this expression of betrayal, like I was the one who had violated his trust. I moved 3 weeks later. Couldn't stay in that house knowing he'd been there, watching me in my most private moments. I got a new place with no attic, installed security cameras, motion sensors. I still wake up sometimes feeling eyes on me. The worst part isn't the violation of privacy or the fear that still lingers. It's the time. The realization that for months, maybe longer, I wasn't alone in my home. That while I slept, someone watched. While I showered, got dressed, cried, laughed, lived my life thinking I was in my private space. I wasn't. I'm a cop. I'm trained to notice things, to protect people. but I couldn't protect myself, couldn't even tell that a stranger was living in my ceiling. The thought that keeps me up at night isn't that he might get out someday and come back. It's wondering if there was something I missed, some sign I should have seen. And sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, I still feel like I'm being watched, like there's still someone up there looking down through a hole I haven't found yet. I've checked every inch of my new place. I know it's empty, but the feeling never goes away. That's the thing about having your sense of safety shattered. You can move houses, change locks, install alarms, but you can never really feel safe again, because you know now with absolute certainty that sometimes the monster isn't under your bed or in your closet. Sometimes he's right above you, listening to you breathe, watching you sleep, waiting for the perfect moment to come down. Story 4. I still don't know how to explain what happened to me last month. I've been hesitant to share this, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of it. I'd been working 60-hour weeks for months straight at my IT job. The stress was getting to me, headaches, trouble sleeping, the works. My buddy Jake suggested I take a weekend to disconnect in the mountains. No cell service, no emails, just me and nature. It sounded perfect. I found this spot in the Cascades that wasn't on any popular hiking maps. It had this small, still lake surrounded by massive pines, the kind of place where you could actually hear yourself think. I packed light, just my tent, sleeping bag, some freeze-dried meals, and basic survival gear. Nothing fancy. The drive up was peaceful. I remember feeling the weight lifting off my shoulders as the city disappeared in my rearview mirror. I parked my truck at this tiny makeshift lot, basically just a widened part of the dirt road, shouldered my pack, and hiked about 2 miles in. The campsite I found was perfect. Flat ground for my tent, a fire ring someone had made with stones, and the lake about 50 yards away. I set up camp, feeling pretty good about everything. The air smelled like pine and wet earth. I gathered firewood, filtered some water from the lake, and heated up one of those backpacker meals. Beef stroganoff that tasted nothing like stroganoff, but I didn't care. As the sun set, I sat by my little fire, watching the flames and sipping instant coffee. That's when I first noticed something felt off. The forest had gone completely silent, and I don't mean peaceful quiet. I mean the kind of silence that feels like pressure in your ears. No birds, no insects, nothing. I told myself it was just the change in temperature, or maybe animals sensing a storm coming. Normal forest stuff. But it didn't feel normal. I turned in around 10, exhausted from the hike and the fresh air. I must have fallen asleep pretty quickly, but I woke up sometime later to the sound of twigs snapping outside. Snap, pause, snap, like something deliberate. My first thought was deer, maybe a raccoon. Then I heard rustling in the brush around my tent. I lay completely still, listening. Whatever it was circling my tent. Then I felt something, I swear to God, brush against the outside wall of my tent. Not like wind or a branch, like a hand or paw running along the fabric. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought whatever was out there could hear it. After what felt like hours, the sounds moved away. I must have eventually fallen back asleep from pure exhaustion. I woke up to gray morning light filtering through my tent. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake this feeling of unease. I made instant coffee on my little camp stove, trying to convince myself it was just normal wildlife. After breakfast, I decided to walk around the lake to clear my head. The water was dark, almost black, and completely still, like glass. I started noticing footprints in the mud near the shore, human footprints, old ones, probably from other hikers weeks ago. Nothing fresh, but still, I thought the place was supposed to be remote. Not many people knew about it. I kept walking, counting steps to distract myself. By midday, the weather started turning. Dark clouds rolled in, and the wind picked up. I headed back to secure my campsite before any rain hit. That's when I saw it. About 50 feet from my tent, the ground had been disturbed. At first, I thought maybe an animal had been digging, looking for food. There were these long marks in the soil that looked like claw marks. Bear, I thought. Had to be a bear. I checked my food supplies. Everything was properly sealed in smell-proof bags and hanging from a tree branch away from my tent. I'd done everything right. Still, I started planning to leave the next morning instead of staying the full weekend. Better safe than sorry. The rest of the day was uneventful, but tense. I kept looking over my shoulder. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I cooked an early dinner before the sun went down, secured everything again, and got into my tent earlier than planned. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up, maybe midnight or so, but what woke me was unmistakable. Something large was moving around my campsite, not small rustling like the night before. Heavy footsteps, the kind that make the ground vibrate slightly. Whatever it was, circled my entire campsite twice, slowly, methodically. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, my hand gripping my pocket knife, like that would do anything against a bear. The footsteps stopped right outside my tent. I could hear breathing, deep, steady breathing, then silence. Absolute silence for maybe 5 minutes. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. Eventually the footsteps moved away, getting fainter until I couldn't hear them anymore. I didn't sleep after that. I just lay there, watching the shadows against my tent, waiting for dawn. When the first light finally came, I immediately unzipped my tent and looked around. Nothing seemed disturbed. My food bag was still hanging where I'd left it. My backpack was untouched. But then I noticed one of the branches I'd gathered for firewood. It was snapped clean in half. Not chewed like an animal would do. Not broken from being dried out. It was a fresh green branch, broken as if someone had deliberately stepped on it. The break was too clean for an animal. That was it. I was done. I packed up as fast as I could, not bothering with breakfast or coffee. Just threw everything in my backpack haphazardly and started hiking back to my truck. I kept looking behind me, scanning the trees. The forest felt different in the morning light, hostile somehow. The 2-mile hike back to my truck seemed much longer than it had coming in. About halfway there, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Footprints on the trail. Large, bare footprints heading in the same direction I was going. Human footprints, but bigger than any human foot I'd ever seen. And bare, despite the cold mountain morning. They hadn't been there the day before when I hiked in, I'm certain of it. I picked up my pace, almost jogging now. That's when I heard it, breathing. Low, raspy breathing just off the trail to my right. Something was pacing me in the trees, following alongside the trail. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it moving through the underbrush, matching my speed. I broke into a full run, my heavy pack bouncing painfully against my back. The breathing and movement kept pace with me for about a 1/4 mile, then suddenly stopped, just vanished. I didn't slow down. I ran until my lungs burned, until I finally saw my truck through the trees. When I reached the clearing where I'd parked, I felt this overwhelming presence. Not exactly eyes watching me, but this pressure. Like the entire forest was pressing down on me, warning me. It felt like a message. Don't come back. This isn't your place. I threw my pack in the truck, fumbled with my keys, and got the hell out of there. I drove straight home without stopping once, checking my rearview mirror the entire time. It's been a month, and I still can't explain what happened. Was it a bear? Some other animal? A person messing with me? Nothing quite fits. Bears don't break branches cleanly or pace hikers without showing themselves. People don't leave enormous bear footprints in cold weather or move silently enough to circle a campsite without being seen. What disturbs me most isn't the fear of being attacked. It's the feeling that whatever was out there wanted me to know it was there. It wanted me to feel its presence. It was studying me, learning about me. I felt known by something that preferred to remain unseen, something that watched from the trees and waited. I haven't been camping since. I haven't told many people about this either. Who would believe me? But I know what I experienced, and I know I'm never going back to those mountains again. Has anyone else encountered something like this? I'm still trying to make sense of it all. Story 5. I still can't sleep with the lights off. It's been almost 7 years, but every noise, every creak, I'm instantly awake, heart pounding, convinced someone is watching me. My therapist says writing about it might help, so here goes. Back in April 2016, I was living in Pinewood County, Oregon, in the house I'd inherited from my great-uncle Edmund. I'd never met the man. He died decades before I was born. But being a 37-year-old high school English teacher with a mountain of student loan debt, I wasn't about to turn down a free house. It started with little things. I'd come home and notice objects slightly out of place. A coffee mug I swore I'd left by the sink now on the counter. My hairbrush moved from one side of the bathroom vanity to the other. I chalked it up to being absent-minded. Grading papers late into the night was making me forgetful. Then came the noises. At first, just the usual settling sounds old houses make. This place was built in 1932, after all. But gradually I started hearing what sounded like footsteps when I was trying to sleep. Not heavy stomping, but the subtle sound of weight shifting on old floorboards. I'd lie frozen in bed, straining to listen, but the sounds would stop as suddenly as they started. After 3 weeks of this, I finally called the sheriff's department. I felt ridiculous, a grown woman afraid of noises in her own house. But Sheriff Maya Cortez took me seriously. She came personally, which surprised me. I expected to be brushed off with a "ma'am, old houses make noise" lecture. "I've lived here 7 years, she told me as she walked through my house, and I've learned to trust when people say something feels wrong. She checked all the doors and windows while I followed her around, wringing my hands like some Victorian hysteric. I remember feeling embarrassed when she found nothing. No broken locks, no jimmied windows, no evidence anyone had been inside besides me. "I'm so sorry for wasting your time," I said, as she prepared to leave. Sheriff Cortez put her hand on my shoulder. "You're not wasting my time, Ms. Blackwood. If anything else happens, anything at all, you call me directly." She handed me her card with her cell number written on the back. As she was leaving, I blurted out what had been gnawing at me. "What if they're already inside?" She gave me a long look. "What makes you say that?" I couldn't explain it, just a feeling, like eyes on me when I was alone. She did another walkthrough, but found nothing. For a few days after, things seemed better. I even laughed at myself for being so paranoid. Then one night, I woke up around 3 in the morning with absolute certainty that someone was standing in my bedroom. I could feel a presence, hear breathing that wasn't mine. I lay completely still, terrified to move, to show I was awake. After what felt like hours but was probably minutes, I heard soft footsteps moving away. I called Sheriff Cortez the next morning. She came with Deputy Torres this time. They did another search, more thorough than before. Torres was checking the basement when he called up to us. "Sheriff, you need to see this." We went down to find him examining what looked like a seam in the wall. "This panel," he said, pressing against it, "it's not original to the foundation." When they removed it, we found a narrow passage behind it, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Sheriff Cortez insisted I wait upstairs while they investigated. 20 minutes later, she came up, her face grim. "Ms. Blackwood, I need you to pack some essentials. You're not staying here tonight." At the station, she showed me photos of what they'd found. There was a small room between the walls, maybe 6 feet by 4 feet. It contained a thin mattress, packages of non-perishable food, water bottles, and a chemical toilet. But what made me vomit right there in the sheriff's office was a shelf with my things. A hairbrush with my hair still in it. A coffee mug I thought I'd lost. A pair of earrings I assumed had fallen behind my dresser. Worse were the photos, dozens of them, of me. Me cooking dinner. Me grading papers at my kitchen table. Me sleeping. And a meticulously drawn diagram of my house with notes about my daily routines. When I left for work. When I showered. Which nights I stayed up late reading. All documented in neat, precise handwriting. "How long?" I whispered, unable to look away from the evidence of this invasion. "Based on the amount of waste in the chemical toilet and the food wrappers, at least 6 months, Sheriff Cortez said. Maybe longer. 6 months. Half a year of someone living in my walls, watching me, taking my things, standing over me while I slept. The violation was so complete I couldn't process it. They found more passages throughout the house. Behind my bedroom wall was a peephole perfectly positioned to watch my bed. Another in the bathroom, one in the kitchen ceiling. The intruder had been moving through the house unseen, watching me from inches away, separated only by thin layers of drywall. The investigation revealed that my great-uncle Edmund had deliberately designed the house with these secret rooms and passages. I'd inherited a house built for voyeurism. As an architect, he'd apparently constructed several homes in the area with similar features. They identified the man 3 days later. Gabriel Mercer, 42 years old. He'd been a troubled teenager when he met my great-uncle, who had apparently taken him under his wing and taught him his twisted architectural secrets. For nearly 30 years, Gabriel had been living intermittently in various houses Edmund had built, watching the occupants without their knowledge. When they arrested him, they found journals going back decades. His entries about me were the most recent, but there were others, so many others. Families, couples, people living alone like me, all watched, all violated, none ever knowing. One entry has haunted me ever since Sheriff Cortez read it to me. They never look up. They sense something, but they never truly look. They never think about the spaces between walls, the eyes that might be watching. Ellen feels it sometimes. She pauses, listens, but then she convinces herself it's nothing. They all do. He knew my patterns better than I did. He knew I took longer showers on Sundays. He knew I talked to myself while grading papers. He knew which floorboards I avoided because they creaked. He'd been studying me like I was some kind of specimen. The investigation expanded. They found similar hidden spaces in 17 properties across the county, all homes my great-uncle had designed. Most had been modified over the years, the hidden spaces sealed up during renovations by owners who never knew what they'd found. but 3 other homes had evidence of recent occupation. Gabriel was sentenced to 25 years. I sat in the courtroom as they led him away. He looked ordinary. That's what keeps me up at night. He looked like anyone you'd pass on the street without a second glance. Before they transferred him to state prison, Sheriff Cortez interviewed him one last time. She told me he smiled and said, "There are others. Edmund had students besides me. We're like a family spread across the country. We have a sign we leave for each other, a triangle inside a circle. If you see it, you know the house has spaces." 6 months after Gabriel was transferred, a sheriff in eastern Washington arrested a man found living in the walls of a suburban home. He had a journal identical to Gabriel's. They found a small triangle inside a circle carved under a basement windowsill. I sold the house, of course, took a massive loss even after disclosing everything, which the law required. I moved to a newly built apartment building in Portland. No history, no walls thick enough to hide anyone. But I still check. Every day I look for unusual seams in the walls. I inspect the ceilings. I listen for breathing that isn't mine. Sometimes I wake up certain someone is standing over me, watching. Sheriff Cortez calls occasionally to check on me. Her department now has a specialized team trained in identifying hidden architectural spaces. The last time we spoke, she told me they've documented at least 23 similar cases across the Pacific Northwest in the years since my discovery. "Look up," she advised residents in a public statement last month. "Look at the spaces between the walls. Look at the places you normally ignore. I do. Every day, every night. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I can hear someone breathing on the other side of the wall." Story 6. I still can't explain what happened to me last August. I've been driving trucks for 16 years now, and nothing even remotely close to this has ever happened. I've tried to make sense of it for months, but I can't. I'm only sharing this now because I need to know if anyone else has experienced something similar. It was August 12th, 2020, around 2:30 in the morning. I was hauling a load of electronics from Salt Lake City to Sacramento on Highway 50 through Nevada. If you've never driven that stretch, it's basically just endless desert. They literally call it the loneliest road in America. No joke. I'd been pushing it too hard that night, trying to make up time after getting stuck behind an accident outside of Ely. My fuel gauge was dipping dangerously low, like needle almost on E-low. I was starting to panic because there's literally nothing out there for miles and miles. Running out of fuel in the Nevada desert at night isn't just an inconvenience, it could be deadly. Cell service is spotty at best, and August temperatures even at night aren't exactly forgiving. I remember thinking I was totally screwed, calculating how far I could go on fumes and knowing it wasn't far enough to reach the next town. Then, like some kind of mirage, I spotted lights up ahead. As I got closer, I could make out the unmistakable outline of a truck stop, a Pilot Travel Center, with its blue and red sign illuminated against the pitch-black desert sky. The relief I felt was unreal. I wasn't religious, but I caught myself saying, "Thank God," out loud in my cab. The place looked completely normal. Fuel islands were well lit, the store lights were on, and the parking lot had at least 20 semis in it. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at all, just a regular truck stop doing business in the middle of the night. I pulled up to a pump, grabbed my company fuel card, and got out. The night air was still hot, probably 85 degrees, with that dry desert heat that sucks the moisture right out of your skin. I swiped my card at the pump, but instead of the usual authorization message, I got an error that read, "Please see attendant." Annoying, but not uncommon. Card readers at remote stations can be finicky. I headed inside, figuring I'd prepay and grab some coffee while I was at it. The automatic doors slid open, and the air conditioning hit me like a wall. The inside looked completely normal. Shelves stocked with snacks, coolers full of drinks, hot food under heat lamps, coffee stations ready to go. The place smelled like every truck stop, a mix of hot dogs, coffee, and cleaning products. But something was off. The place was completely empty. Not a single customer, not a single employee, nobody behind the register, nobody restocking shelves, nobody mopping floors, just nobody. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed slightly against the tile floor. No answer. I walked up to the counter, thinking maybe someone was in the back office or restroom. I waited a minute, then another. I called out again, louder this time. Nothing. The coffee pots were full and looked fresh. The hot food display had pizza and hot dogs under the lamps. The nacho cheese in the dispenser was bubbling. Everything was running as if the place was fully staffed and operational, but there wasn't a soul around. I was getting seriously creeped out at this point, but I still needed fuel desperately. I thought maybe there was some kind of emergency and everyone had stepped outside briefly, so I headed back out to check. The parking lot was still full of trucks, but now that I was paying closer attention, I noticed something strange. They all looked like older models. There were Peterbilts, Kenworths, and Freightliners, but none of the newer models. Everything looked like it was from the 90s or early 2000s, and they were all parked with almost mathematical precision in their spaces. I walked toward the closest truck, a blue Kenworth. The parking lights were on, but the engine was off. As I got closer, I noticed a thick layer of dust covering the entire vehicle, like it had been sitting there for months, not hours. The license plate had a 2017 registration sticker. I peered into the cab through the passenger window. There was a thermos on the dash, some scattered papers, and a small family photo taped to the console, but everything looked faded, old, like they'd been sitting in the sun for years. I checked another truck and another, same thing. All had their parking lights on. All were coated in dust. All had outdated registration stickers, and all were empty. My heart was hammering in my chest by this point. Something was very, very wrong here. I decided to get back to my truck and just leave, fuel or no fuel. I'd rather take my chances running out of gas than stay at this place any longer. As I was walking back to my rig, I heard an engine start up. I turned to see a maroon Peterbilt with a sleeper cab at the far end of the lot. Its headlights flicked on, illuminating a cloud of dust that had settled around it. Then, slowly, it began to pull out of its parking space. I froze in place, watching. The truck moved with purpose, making a slow, precise turn toward the exit. It passed under a light pole, and I got a clear look inside the cab. There was no one behind the wheel. I'm not talking about someone ducking down or hiding. The cab was completely empty. I could see straight through the windshield to the back of the cab. No driver. Nothing. I felt like my blood had turned to ice. I couldn't move as I watched this driverless truck roll past me, maintaining a perfect line as it headed toward the highway. It pulled onto the road, picked up speed, and disappeared into the darkness. I ran back to my truck, fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. I climbed into the cab and locked all the doors. I was breathing hard, my heart pounding in my ears. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. That's when I noticed my fuel gauge. It was at 3/4 full. I stared at it in disbelief. When I'd pulled in, I was running on fumes. Now my tank was mostly full. I hadn't fueled up. I hadn't even managed to talk to anyone about paying for fuel. But somehow, my truck had been refueled. I checked my fuel card receipts. Nothing. I looked at my personal credit card. No charges. I even checked my cash to see if I'd paid and somehow forgotten. All there. I had no memory of fueling up, no record of payment, but my tank was undeniably filled. I didn't waste another second. I started my truck and got the hell out of there, pushing well past the speed limit until I reached Reno around 5 in the morning. I pulled into a Flying J that was bustling with normal morning activity. Drivers getting coffee, employees restocking shelves, everything as it should be. My hands were still shaking as I walked inside. I grabbed a coffee and approached a driver who looked like he'd been on the road a while. "Hey man," I said, trying to sound casual. "You know that pilot station back on 50, about 100 miles east of here?" He looked confused. "On 50? There's no pilot out there. Nearest one is in Fernley, and it's been closed for renovation for months." I felt sick. "You sure? It's a big place, lots of trucks parked there." The guy shook his head. "Buddy, there's nothing out there but desert. Been driving that route for 20 years. I must have looked pretty rattled because he leaned in closer. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed. Maybe I did. I sat down at one of the tables, trying to collect myself. An older driver at the next table caught my eye. "I overheard you talking about a truck stop on 50, he said quietly. "When exactly did you see this place?" I told him, and his expression turned grim. "You're not the first," he said. "There are stories. Drivers seeing a truck stop that isn't supposed to be there. Always in the same spot. Always with the same trucks parked outside. Always empty inside." "What is it?" I asked. He shrugged. "Nobody knows, but over the years, drivers have gone missing on that stretch. Their rigs found abandoned, out of fuel. The drivers never seen again." I felt a cold sweat break out all over my body. But my truck, it was refueled somehow. The old driver stared at me for a long moment. "Maybe whatever's out there took something else from you instead." I've been checking myself ever since, physically, mentally. I don't feel any different. But sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, thinking about that maroon Peterbilt with no driver, and I wonder what might have happened if I'd run out of fuel before reaching that phantom truck stop. Or worse, what might have happened if I hadn't left when I did. I've driven that route 3 times since then. I've never seen the truck stop again. But every time I pass that stretch of desert, my fuel gauge jumps slightly, just for a second. And I swear I can see distant lights in my rearview mirror that disappear when I look directly at them. I don't know what I experienced that night. I don't know how my truck was refueled or by what. But I know it was real, and I know I never want to experience it again. Story 7. I've been hesitating to share this for a long time. Even now, my hands are shaking as I type this out. I'm not a superstitious person, never have been. 23 years hauling timber through the Idaho mountains will beat that out of you pretty quick. Nature doesn't care about your lucky socks or your rabbits' foot when you're navigating a loaded rig down an icy 6% grade. But what happened to me last October on Bear Creek Pass? I still can't explain it. I'm Clint, 48 years old, and until that day, I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at a man. It started like any other haul. I was scheduled to transport a load from the Mackenzie Creek site to Bennett's Mill down in Lewiston. Nothing I hadn't done hundreds of times before. The foreman, Dave, caught me when I pulled in that morning. "Clint, there's a storm system moving in faster than they predicted. Might want to reschedule this run." I checked the radar on my phone. The storm was still a good 5 hours out, and I only needed about 3 to get over Bear Creek Pass before the worst hit. "I'll be fine, Dave. Been crossing that pass since you were still wearing diapers." Dave didn't laugh. "Your call. Just don't want to be sending search and rescue after you." I should have listened. But after 19 years on these routes, you develop a certain arrogance about your abilities. Plus, I needed the hours. My ex-wife's lawyer had been making noise about increasing child support payments again. The loading took longer than expected. One of the grapple operators called in sick, and his replacement was green as spring grass. By the time we got the load secured, snow was already falling. Not the light, friendly kind either. Those big wet flakes that stick to everything and pile up fast. I did my pre-trip inspection, checked all the binders holding the logs in place, and climbed into the cab. My rig was a Kenworth W900 with a Cummins X15, reliable in most conditions, but even the best equipment has its limits. I cranked the heat, put on some Waylon Jennings, and started the climb toward Bear Creek Pass. For those who don't know, Bear Creek is notorious among timber haulers. It tops out at 7,000 feet, with 7 major switchbacks on the east side and 5 even sharper ones on the west. The eastern approach is a steady 5% grade, but the western descent hits 8% in places, with 2 hairpin turns that have claimed more than a few drivers over the years. By the time I hit the first switchback, the snow was coming down hard enough that I had to slow to about 15 miles per hour. My wipers were working overtime, and visibility was dropping by the minute. The CB radio crackled with warnings from other drivers, all saying the same thing: turn back or hurry up. I pushed on. The second and third switchbacks weren't too bad, but by the fourth, the road was disappearing under a blanket of white. My chains were biting well, but the wind was picking up, creating small drifts across the roadway. The temperature gauge on my dash showed 23 degrees and falling. Halfway up the fifth switchback, the world outside my windshield turned into a complete whiteout. I couldn't see more than 10 feet ahead. The edge of the road, and the 600-foot drop beyond it, was completely invisible. I had to navigate by feel, keeping my right tires just touching the rumble strip on the mountainside of the road. "Come on, old girl," I said to my truck. "We've been through worse." We hadn't. It took me nearly an hour to crawl the last mile to the summit. By then, the snow was 8 inches deep and still coming down. Wind was howling around the cab hard enough to rock the whole rig. I pulled into the small turnout at the top, which was mercifully empty of other vehicles. Nobody else was dumb enough to be up there. I needed to check my load before starting the descent. In conditions like these, a shifting load can be deadly. One log breaks free, and suddenly you've got 30,000 pounds pushing you down the mountain faster than your brakes can handle. I zipped up my heavy Carhartt, pulled my hat down low, and stepped out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked me over, driving snow and ice into my face like needles. I trudged around to the back of the cab, using my flashlight to check the bindings. That's when I heard it, a cracking sound from somewhere in the middle of the load. Not the sharp crack of wood splitting, but the metallic pop of a binder under too much strain. "No, no, no," I muttered, scrambling toward the sound. I was halfway along the trailer when it happened. The center binder snapped with a sound like a gunshot. I watched in horror as the entire load shifted, logs rolling against each other. Then the domino effect started, one binder after another failing under the sudden redistribution of weight. Time slowed down. I saw the massive logs begin to slide, thousands of pounds of timber breaking free from my trailer. Pure instinct took over. I dove beneath the truck, rolling under the rear axle as the first logs crashed onto the spot where I'd been standing. The sound was deafening, like a freight train derailing right above me. Logs smashed into the ground, some bouncing and rolling across the turnout, others sliding off into the abyss beyond the guardrail. One hit the fuel tank on the driver's side, and I smelled diesel immediately. When it finally stopped, I was trembling so hard I could barely crawl out from my hiding place. Half my load was gone, scattered across the turnout or over the edge. The remaining logs were hanging precariously off the passenger side of the trailer. The truck itself was tilted at an alarming angle, the driver's side lifted several inches off the ground by the shifting weight. I climbed back into the cab, hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. The engine started, but a warning light showed the fuel system was compromised. I wasn't going anywhere. I grabbed the CB mic. Breaker, this is Clint Donovan at Bear Creek Summit. I've got a load failure and fuel leak. Anyone copy? Nothing but static answered me. The storm was probably interfering with the signal. I tried my cell phone. No service. The reality of my situation began to sink in. I was stranded in a worsening blizzard, at least 15 miles from the nearest town. The temperature was dropping fast, and night was coming. If I stayed with the truck, I might freeze. If I tried to walk out, I'd definitely freeze. I decided to wait an hour, trying the radio every 10 minutes, then reassess. I had emergency supplies, water, some protein bars, a sleeping bag rated for 0 degrees. But the cab was already getting cold with the engine off, and I didn't dare run it with a fuel leak. 45 minutes later, I was seriously considering trying to hike down the eastern slope. It would be a brutal walk in these conditions, but at least there was a small way station about 7 miles down that might have people. That's when I saw the headlights. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. They appeared through the whiteout like ghostly eyes, moving slowly up the western approach, the more dangerous side. I grabbed my flashlight and stumbled out of the cab, waving it frantically. The vehicle, another logging truck I could now see, crawled into the turnout and stopped. The driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out, battling against the wind to reach me. It was a woman, maybe mid-30s, wearing heavy winter gear that couldn't quite hide her slight frame. Her face was partially obscured by a scarf, but I could see dark eyes studying me and my wrecked rig. "You okay?" she shouted over the wind. "Load shifted," I yelled back. "Snapped the binders." She nodded, surveying the damage with experienced eyes. "I'm Sarah Larson. Let's see what we can do." For the next hour, Sarah helped me secure what remained of my load. She had extra chains and binders in her truck, and she knew exactly what she was doing. We worked methodically in the freezing cold, our hands going numb despite heavy gloves. All the while, she kept up a steady stream of practical advice. "We can't go west," she said once we'd stabilized the remaining logs. "Too steep with this compromised load. We'll head back east, nice and slow. I'll lead, you follow. Flash your lights if you need to stop." I was too grateful to argue. With her help, I patched the fuel line well enough to get some distance, and we started back down the eastern slope. Sarah's truck moved at a careful pace, its taillights like beacons in the swirling snow. Every switchback was a test of nerve and skill, but having her ahead somehow made it manageable. 3 agonizing hours later, we pulled into the logging camp at the base of the mountain. By then, the storm was in full fury, visibility nearly 0. Dave and a couple of other guys ran out to meet us, shocked to see anyone coming down from the pass. "Jesus, Clint," Dave shouted. "We were just about to call search and rescue. How the hell did you make it down?" "Had help," I said, turning to gesture towards Sarah's truck. But when I looked, there was nothing behind me. No truck, no Sarah. "What help?" Dave asked, looking puzzled. "The other driver, Sarah Larson. She found me at the summit after my load shifted, helped me secure everything and led me down." Dave's face changed. The other men exchanged glances. "Clint, you came down alone. We watched you pull in. There wasn't any other truck." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "That's impossible. She was right in front of me the whole way. Sarah Larson said she hauls for..." I realized I couldn't remember her mentioning a company. One of the older guys, Pete, who'd been hauling these routes for 30 years, stepped forward. "Sarah Larson, you said?" I nodded. "What did she look like?" "Mid-30s, dark hair, small build." I hesitated. "Had a scar on her right hand, like a burn mark." Pete went pale. "Did she say anything about the west slope, about the second hairpin?" "Just that we couldn't risk it with my compromised load." Pete took off his hat. 5 years ago, there was an accident on that second hairpin. Brake failure. Driver couldn't make the turn, went through. The guardrail. Mike Holloway was his name, but everyone called him Sarah, I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He was transgender. Pete nodded slowly. Was transitioning. Most of us didn't know until after. She'd just started living as Sarah full-time a few months before the accident. My legs nearly gave out. Dave grabbed my arm to steady me. "You're saying I imagined her?" I asked. "I'm saying no one's seen Sarah Larson in 5 years," Pete replied. "And no truck came down that mountain with you tonight." I didn't sleep for 3 days after that. I went through every possible explanation: hallucination from hypothermia, another driver who left before reaching camp, a massive coincidence with names. None of it made sense. A week later, I drove back to the summit in better weather to retrieve any salvageable equipment. The logs were there, scattered exactly as I remembered. The damage to my truck matched my memory. But Sarah's extra chains, the ones she'd given me to secure my load, were nowhere to be found. I don't drive Bear Creek Pass anymore. Found a new route that adds 90 minutes to my haul, but keeps me away from that summit. But every October, when the first snows start falling, I drive to the base of the pass and leave a thermos of coffee, black, 2 sugars, the way Mike used to drink it according to Pete. Maybe it's stupid. Maybe I really did hallucinate the whole thing. But I know what I experienced, and I know who saved my life that night. And sometimes, when I'm driving late and the snow is falling just right, I swear I can see headlights in my rearview mirror. They follow me for a while, then turn off onto a road that isn't there. Story 8. I still can't sleep properly after what happened last week. Every time I close my eyes, I see that blue pickup truck in my rearview mirror. I need to get this off my chest, even if no one believes me. I was driving cross-country from Boston to San Francisco for a new job opportunity. I'd planned this trip for months, mapped out my route, booked motels along the way, even made a special playlist. 3 days into my journey, I hit Highway 50 in Nevada. They call it the loneliest road in America, and now I understand why. That morning started normally enough. I woke up in my motel in Ely, grabbed a quick breakfast at the diner next door, and hit the road by 8. The scenery was breathtaking. Vast desert landscapes, mountains in the distance, and a sky so big it made me feel tiny. For the first couple hours, I was enjoying the solitude, singing along to my music, occasionally stopping to take photos of the empty road stretching to the horizon. Around noon, I noticed a blue pickup truck behind me. At first, I didn't think anything of it. It was just another vehicle on an otherwise empty road. But after an hour of driving, I realized it was still there, maintaining the same distance, not passing me, not falling behind, just there. I'm not usually paranoid, but something about this didn't feel right. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were going to the same destination. Maybe they were just keeping a safe distance. But Highway 50 is straight for miles. If they wanted to pass, they could have done it 100 times over. I decided to test my theory. I slowed down from 65 to 55. The truck slowed down too. I sped up to 75. The truck matched my speed. My heart started pounding against my ribs. I checked my phone. No service. Of course. By this point, my knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel. I needed to get somewhere with people. According to my map, a tiny town called Middlegate was coming up in about 20 miles. I just needed to stay calm until then. Those 20 miles felt like 200. Every few seconds, my eyes darted to the rearview mirror. The blue truck maintained its position, never getting too close, but never disappearing either. I tried to get a look at the driver, but the windshield glare made it impossible. When I finally saw the exit for Middlegate, I nearly cried with relief. I took the turn without signaling. A stupid move, I know, but I was desperate to see if the truck would follow. It did. The town was basically just a gas station with a small diner attached. I pulled up to a pump, making sure to park where the attendant could see me. As I got out to pump gas, I watched the blue truck pull into the lot. It parked about 50 feet away, engine still running. I couldn't see the driver clearly, just the silhouette of what looked like a man behind the wheel. Inside the station, a middle-aged guy with a gray mustache was working the register. I paid for my gas and then, trying to sound casual, mentioned the blue pickup. "That truck's been following me for the past hour or so on Highway 50, I said, glancing out the window. "Is that normal around here?" The attendant frowned and looked out at the parking lot. "Blue Chevy? Older model?" I nodded. "You're the third person this month to mention it," he said, lowering his voice. "Some woman last week said she was followed all the way from Ely. Guy before that said the same thing." He leaned in closer. "Where you headed?" "San Francisco," I replied. "But I was planning to stop in Fallon tonight." "Listen," he said. "Fallon's about 70 miles west. Try to get there before dark. They've got a decent motel right off the highway. Sheriff's office nearby, too." He scribbled something on a piece of paper. "Here's the number for the Fallon police, just in case." My mouth went dry. "You think I should call the police?" He shrugged. "Probably nothing. Lots of weird folks on this road, but better safe than sorry." I thanked him, tucked the number into my pocket, and headed back to my car. The blue truck was still there, engine running. I got in my car, locked the doors, and pulled back onto Highway 50, heading west. In my mirror, I watched the truck pull out after me. For the next 20 minutes, the truck kept its distance. Then suddenly, it was gone. I kept checking my mirrors, but the road behind me was empty. The relief I felt was overwhelming, like I could finally breathe again. Maybe I had been paranoid. Maybe it was just someone heading in the same direction who'd turned off somewhere. I relaxed my grip on the steering wheel and turned my music back up. The sun was starting to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert. I calculated that I'd reach Fallon before dusk if I maintained my speed. That's when I saw it again. The blue truck had somehow gotten ahead of me and was now parked on the shoulder. As I approached, it pulled back onto the highway, right in front of me. Now I was following it. My heart dropped into my stomach. This wasn't a coincidence. This person, whoever they were, was deliberately playing with me. I considered my options. I could turn around, but what if they followed? I could pull over and wait, but then I'd be stranded on an empty road with night approaching. My best bet was to reach Fallon, where there were people and police. I decided to pass the truck. I accelerated, moved into the oncoming lane. The road was completely empty, and started to overtake. As I pulled alongside, the truck sped up too. I pushed my foot down harder, reaching 70, then 80 mph. The truck matched my speed, preventing me from passing. Then the driver turned to look at me. He was middle-aged with a thick beard. He wasn't smiling or threatening. He looked urgent. He pointed at me, then behind me, then down at my car. I didn't understand. Was he trying to tell me something? Or was this some kind of sick game? I was too scared to try to interpret. I just needed to get away. I floored it, pushing my old Honda to 90 mph. The truck kept pace. Then, unexpectedly, it pulled ahead of me and started slowing down, forcing me to reduce speed unless I wanted to rear-end it. We're down to 40 mph when I heard it. A loud bang from the back of my car, followed by the sickening thud, thud, thud of a flat tire. My car lurched to the right, and I had to fight the steering wheel to keep from spinning out. I managed to pull onto the shoulder, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key to shut off the engine. The blue truck had stopped about 100 feet ahead of me. I saw the driver's door open. I locked my doors, grabbed my pepper spray from the glove compartment, and called 911 on my cell. No service, of course. The man from the truck was walking toward me now. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, hands visible at his sides. I held up my pepper spray so he could see it through the window. He stopped about 10 feet from my car and held up his hands. "Your tire's shredded," he called out. "I was trying to warn you." I didn't respond. My mind was racing through self-defense classes I'd taken years ago. Keys between fingers. Go for the eyes. Scream as loud as you can. "I'm Robert," he continued. "I'm a mechanic from Elko. I noticed your tire was coming apart about 20 miles back. Been trying to get you to pull over before it blew." He pointed to the back of my car. "See for yourself, but stay in the car if you want. I can change it for you." I was terrified, but curiosity got the better of me. Keeping one eye on him, I glanced in my side mirror. My rear tire was completely shredded. Rubber hung from it in strips. "I've got a jack," he said. "You got a spare?" I nodded slowly. "Pop the trunk and I'll get it out. You can stay in the car, doors locked. I understand you're scared." I hesitated. What choice did I have? I was stranded on an empty highway with a blown tire and no cell service. If he wanted to hurt me, he could have done it already. I popped the trunk but stayed in the car with doors locked and pepper spray ready. Through my mirrors, I watched him retrieve my spare tire and jack. He worked efficiently, occasionally, glancing up at me with what seemed like genuine concern. 15 minutes later, he had the spare installed. He closed my trunk and approached my window. "It's just a temporary," he said. "You'll need to get a real replacement in Fallon. I can follow you there if you want. Make sure you get in safe." I rolled my window down just a crack. "Why were you following me like that? Why didn't you just flash your lights or something?" He looked embarrassed. "I did, but you didn't seem to notice. Then I tried to get alongside you, but every time I did, you sped up. I figured you thought I was some creep." He shrugged. "I guess I made it worse by trying to help." It made sense, but I was still wary. "I'm okay now. Thanks for the help." "Listen," he said, "that spare isn't meant for highway speeds. I'm heading to Fallon anyway. Let me follow behind you, just to make sure you get there okay. You can call the cops on me when we get there if it makes you feel better." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We drove the remaining 50 miles to Fallon at a cautious 50 mph, the blue truck keeping a respectful distance behind me the whole way. When we reached the motel in Fallon, he waved, then drove off. The next morning, I got my tire replaced at a local garage and continued my journey to San Francisco without incident. I tried to put the whole experience behind me. Then, 3 days after arriving in San Francisco, I was scrolling through news online when I saw it. An article about a serial predator who had been targeting lone female drivers on remote highways across Nevada. They used a blue pickup truck. The main suspect had been arrested 2 weeks ago, but authorities believed he had an accomplice who was still at large. I've spent every day since then wondering, was Robert really trying to help me? Or did I narrowly escape becoming another victim? Would a predator really fix my tire and escort me to safety? Or was it all part of some plan that didn't work out? I don't know. What's worse? The idea that I was being stalked by a predator, or the possibility that I misjudged someone who was genuinely trying to help me. I keep replaying everything in my mind, looking for clues I might have missed. The uncertainty is what terrifies me the most. I'll never know for sure who was driving that blue truck on Highway 50, or what their true intentions were. And somehow, that's more frightening than any definitive answer could ever be. Story 9. I've been a trucker for almost 18 years now. Been all over the lower 48. I've seen fog so thick you could cut it with a knife, driven through blizzards that turned the world white, and weathered storms that made my 18-wheeler feel like a toy. But what happened to me this past February, I still can't explain it, and I'm not sure I want to try. I was doing a standard haul from Memphis to Little Rock on I-40. Nothing special about the cargo, just some electronics headed for a distribution center. I'd done this route dozens of times before. The night was clear, temperatures in the low 40s, perfect driving conditions. I remember pulling out of the Memphis depot around 11:30 at night. The plan was to make Little Rock by 3 in the morning, get some shut-eye at the truck stop I always use, then make my delivery at 8. Around 1:30 in the morning, I was approaching Forest City, Arkansas. The traffic was practically non-existent, just me, my thoughts, and some late-night talk radio keeping me company. I remember sipping my coffee when I noticed something odd about the mile markers. At first, I thought I was just tired. We all know how the mind plays tricks when you've been staring at asphalt for hours. But I distinctly remember passing mile marker 271, then 270, then 269. That's when it hit me. I was heading east, toward Little Rock. The mile markers should have been increasing, not decreasing. I brushed it off. Maybe I'd misread them, or there was some construction-related renumbering I hadn't heard about. But then I passed another one, 268, and another, 267, each one counting down instead of up. I reached for my CB radio. Breaker 19, this is eastbound on I-40 near Forest City. Anyone else notice something weird with the mile markers? After some static, a voice came through. Deep, southern drawl. This is Big Jim. I'm eastbound too, maybe 20 miles ahead of you. Thought I was losing my mind. They're counting backward, aren't they? Hearing someone else confirm it sent a chill down my spine. Yeah, exactly. Any idea what's going on? Negative, driver. Been on this stretch for about an hour now. Doesn't make a lick of sense. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was some kind of temporary signage during road work. But as I drove on, I noticed more irregularities. The exit signs were all wrong. Towns that should have been behind me were listed as upcoming exits. Places that should have been 50 miles ahead were showing up now. Then I'd see exits for towns I'd passed an hour ago. The GPS on my phone showed I was on I-40 heading east, right where I should be. But something felt off. The landscape looked similar to what I remembered of this stretch, but somehow different in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on. Trees where there shouldn't be trees, hills that seemed higher than I recalled. Around 2 in the morning, my headlights caught something up ahead, another truck coming from the opposite direction. Nothing unusual about that, except as it got closer, I could make out its details. It was a blue Peterbilt with chrome detailing, exactly like mine. Same model, same color, same company logo on the door. As it passed me, I caught a glimpse of the driver, and my blood ran cold. It was me. Not someone who looked like me. It was me, but older. Gray hair, deeper wrinkles around the eyes, a gauntness to the face I don't have. But unmistakably my face, and the expression, God, I'll never forget that expression. Pure exhaustion, like someone who'd been driving for days without rest. Hopelessness in the eyes. I nearly swerved off the road. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I pulled over at the next rest area, my hands shaking as I put the truck in park. I needed to collect myself, figure out what was happening. I tried the CB again. Big Jim, you still there? There was a longer pause this time, and when the voice came back, it sounded different, older, more tired. Still here, Ray. Been here a while now. I never told him my name was Ray. How'd you know my name? I asked, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. You told me. Don't you remember? Must have been... Hell, I don't know anymore. Feels like weeks ago. Weeks? I just spoke to you 10 minutes ago. A hollow laugh came through the speaker. Time's funny out here, isn't it? I've been driving this same stretch for what feels like months now. Every exit just loops back to the highway. Every town is the next town and the last town all at once. I checked my fuel gauge, still 3/4 full, exactly where it had been when I left Memphis. That wasn't possible. I should have used at least a quarter tank by now. I looked at my GPS again. According to it, I'd traveled about 180 miles from Memphis. But my truck's odometer showed I'd only gone about 20 miles since my last stop. Something else was wrong too. The rest area I'd pulled into wasn't on any map I knew. It had all the usual facilities, bathrooms, vending machines, picnic tables, but the building style looked decades out of date, like something from the 70s. And there wasn't another soul around, not even a parked car. I decided to take an exit, get off this highway altogether. The next one was for a town called Whitmore. I'd never heard of it, but at that point, I just wanted to get away from I-40. I took the exit, followed the ramp around the curve, and found myself merging right back onto I-40, heading east again. I tried another exit 5 miles later. Same result, the ramp curved around and dropped me right back on I-40. It was like being in one of those nightmares where you're running down a hallway that keeps stretching longer and longer. The mile markers kept decreasing. 255, 254, 253. By my calculation, I should have been approaching Little Rock by now, but there was no sign of the city. Just the same endless highway, the same trees and fields and occasional gas stations that looked closed and abandoned. I tried calling my dispatcher. The call connected, but no one answered. Just silence on the other end. I tried my wife, my brother, even 911, all connected, but no one ever picked up. My CB radio crackled to life again, but it wasn't Big Jim this time. Different voices started coming through, one after another. Been driving this stretch for 3 weeks now. Gas gauge never moves. Can't get off. I think it's been 2 years for me. You stop counting after a while. The mile markers are counting down my life. That's what I figured. Each one is a year I'll spend on this road. Their voices all had that same quality. Exhausted, hollow, like they'd given up hope long ago. I started scanning through channels, and on channel 17, I heard a voice that made me nearly vomit from fear. It was my voice. the older me I'd seen driving the other truck. This is Ray Martinez. If anyone new is out there listening, I've been on this road for 15 years now. You can't get off. You can't go back. All you can do is keep driving forward and hope there's an end somewhere. I grabbed the mic. This is Ray Martinez too. I just got on this highway tonight. How can you be me? A long pause. I was you once, young Ray, just starting this drive. I've passed myself so many times now I've lost count. It's always the same. You'll see me, then become me, then see yourself. Round and round it goes. I threw the radio down. This wasn't happening. Couldn't be happening. I pulled over again, got out of my truck, and started walking along the shoulder, away from the highway. Maybe on foot I could find a way out, reach a town, find help. I walked for what felt like hours, but every time I looked back, my truck was still visible in the distance. I wasn't getting any farther away from it, and ahead of me, the highway just stretched on endlessly. I went back to the truck, tried every exit I came across. Every one led back to the same highway. The towns on the signs never appeared. The mile markers kept counting down, 230, 229, 228. The sky never changed. It remained that deep, dark blue of the middle of the night. The clock on my dashboard was stuck at 2:43 a.m. My phone's clock kept ticking forward, but the sky never lightened into dawn. At some point, I passed a truck pulled over on the shoulder, a blue Peterbilt, just like mine. I slowed down, and there I was again, the older me standing beside his truck, watching me pass with those hollow eyes. He raised his hand in a small wave, a gesture of recognition and resignation. I've been driving for 23 hours now, according to my phone anyway. The sky is still dark. The mile markers are down to 168. My fuel gauge hasn't moved. I've tried every exit, called every number in my phone, shouted myself hoarse on every CB channel. Big Jim doesn't answer anymore, neither does older Ray. It's just me now, driving east on a highway that never ends, watching the mile markers count down to something I don't understand. I've started to wonder if I died back in Memphis, if this is some kind of purgatory or hell, or maybe I fell asleep at the wheel and this is all a dream I can't wake from, but it feels too real. The vibration of the engine, the smell of coffee gone cold in my cup holder, the ache in my lower back from sitting too long. The GPS still says I'm on I-40, heading toward Little Rock, but I know now I'll never reach it. I'm on a different highway altogether, one that doesn't exist on any map, one where the rules of time and space don't apply. I don't know what to do except keep driving and hope that eventually I'll find an exit that actually leads somewhere else. Or maybe I'll become the older Ray I keep seeing, warning some younger version of myself about a fate I couldn't avoid. If anyone is reading this, I managed to post it using my phone, though I don't know if it'll actually reach the outside world, and you're driving I-40 through Arkansas late at night, watch the mile markers. If they start counting in the wrong direction, turn around. Turn around while you still can, because I can't. Not anymore. All I can do is keep driving east on this backwards highway that never ends, watching the numbers count down to whatever waits for me at the end, if there even is an end. Story 10. I've been in law enforcement for over 26 years now, and the last 11 as sheriff of Crawford County, Arizona. I've seen my fair share of horrible things, domestic violence, fatal car accidents, even a few murders. But nothing prepared me for what we discovered at the Desert Pines Motel last October. The Desert Pines is one of those roadside relics from the 60s. Neon sign with half the letters burnt out, faded paint, the kind of place most people would drive past if they had any other option. It sits on a desolate stretch of Highway 60, about 30 miles from anything resembling civilization. In all my years patrolling these roads, I'd never given it much thought. Just another struggling business hanging on by a thread in our economically depressed county. That changed when I got a call from the Phoenix PD asking about a missing couple, Michael and Jennifer Chen. According to their daughter, they'd been on a road trip to visit family in New Mexico and had texted her that they were staying overnight at the Desert Pines. That was 3 days earlier, and no one had heard from them since. Their phones were going straight to voicemail. I drove out to the motel that same afternoon. Vernon Gillis, the owner, greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I'd met him a few times at Chamber of Commerce meetings. Quiet guy, kept to himself, had owned the place for about 7 years. Nothing particularly memorable about him. When I asked about the Chens, he pulled out his registration book without hesitation. Oh, sure, I remember them. Asian couple, mid-50s. They stayed just the one night in room 8. Checked out early the next morning, around 6. Said something about wanting to beat the heat. It all seemed straightforward enough, but something felt off. Maybe it was the way his eyes darted away when he mentioned their early departure, or how his hand trembled slightly as he showed me the checkout signature. 26 years of interviewing people teaches you to notice these things. Mind if I take a look at room 8? I asked casually. A flicker of something, annoyance, worry, crossed his face before he shrugged. Sure thing, Sheriff. It's been cleaned already, though. Had a trucker stay there last night. Room 8 smelled strongly of bleach. Now motel rooms are never the cleanest places, but this was different. The whole place reeked of industrial-grade cleaning products. I've been to enough crime scenes to recognize when someone's trying to erase evidence. You always clean this thoroughly? I asked. Gillis shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Got to keep standards up. Competition's fierce. I almost laughed at that. The nearest motel was 30 miles away and barely any better than this dump. Nobody staying at the Desert Pines was there for the 5-star experience. I called in a deputy to keep an eye on Gillis while I went back to get a search warrant. Judge Mendoza knows me well enough to trust my instincts, and within 2 hours, we were back with a full team and luminol. When we turned off the lights and sprayed the room, what we saw turned my stomach. Despite the aggressive cleaning, blood traces showed up on the ceiling and behind the headboard. Not just a few drops either, spatters consistent with a violent attack. Gillis claimed ignorance. Must have been there from before. Place has been here since the 60s. Lots of history in these walls. But his nervous sweating told me otherwise. I had my deputies run a deeper background check on Vernon Gillis while we secured the scene. What came back was disturbing in its emptiness. Before purchasing the Desert Pines 7 years ago, Vernon Gillis barely existed. A driver's license from Nevada, a social security number that checked out but had minimal activity, and not much else. No family, no previous addresses we could find, no employment history. Most tellingly, he'd bought the motel with cash, $300,000. Where does a man with no visible means of income get that kind of money? But what really set alarm bells ringing was when Deputy Martinez discovered that despite owning a perfectly good house in town, purchased 2 years after the motel, Gillis lived in a converted storage room behind the office. The house sat empty, immaculately maintained but unoccupied. We were still processing this information when a car pulled into the lot, a family of 4 from California on their way to the Grand Canyon. Before they could even get out of their minivan, I intercepted them. Sorry folks, we've got a gas leak situation here. Not safe. There's another motel about 30 miles up the highway. The father looked disappointed, but nodded. Thanks for the warning, officer. I watched them drive away with relief. If my gut feeling was right, I'd just saved their lives. With the motel now clear of any guests, we expanded our search. Martinez suggested we check Gillis's living quarters more thoroughly. It was a cramped space, just a bed, a small kitchenette, and a bathroom. Everything was meticulously organized, almost obsessively clean. Martinez noticed it first, a section of the linoleum floor that didn't quite match the rest. When we pulled it back, we found a trapdoor secured with a padlock. I broke it open with bolt cutters, revealing a narrow tunnel with crude lighting strung along the ceiling. "Jesus Christ," Martinez whispered. The tunnel split in different directions. With flashlights drawn, we followed one branch, finding it led to another trapdoor, this one opening into the floor of a closet in room 4. Further exploration revealed similar access points to every room in the motel. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Gillis had created a system that allowed him to enter any occupied room undetected in the middle of the night. My mind flashed to the Chens, probably sleeping soundly after a long day of driving, completely unaware of the predator crawling up from below. We called in the state police and cadaver dogs. The dogs alerted at multiple locations on the property, including a dumpster area behind the main building and several spots in the surrounding desert. But the real horror was what we found in the maintenance shed. Behind a false wall was a room about 10 by 12 feet. Plastic sheeting covered the floor. Restraints hung from hooks on the wall. A drain was set into the center of the concrete floor, and on a workbench along one wall sat his trophies: watches, jewelry, wallets, driver's licenses. We counted IDs from at least 11 different individuals. Next to these was a leather-bound journal. Opening it made my hands shake. Gillis had documented everything: names, dates, which rooms his victims had stayed in. He'd made notes about which rooms were best suited for quiet work and which guests were light sleepers requiring special handling. By this point, Vernon Gillis had vanished. He must have slipped away while we were executing the initial search warrant. We issued an APB immediately, but I knew in my gut he wouldn't be easy to find. Someone who'd maintained such a low profile for years would know how to disappear. 3 days later, a state trooper in New Mexico approached a man at a rest stop whose car matched the description of Gillis's vehicle. Before the trooper could even speak, the man pulled out a gun and shot himself in the head. It was Gillis. The investigation that followed revealed the true scope of his crimes. Forensic evidence eventually linked him to 17 disappearances across 4 states spanning 9 years. Ground-penetrating radar located human remains buried at various points around the property. Some had been there for years. The tunnel system was particularly disturbing to me. It hadn't been built all at once. Geological analysis showed it had been expanded gradually over the years. This wasn't some impulsive killer. This was someone who had methodically created a killing ground, improving it over time, learning from each murder how to make the next one more efficient. The motel's location had been perfect for his purposes, remote enough that screams wouldn't be heard, situated on a highway frequently used by travelers passing through who might not be missed for days or weeks. And Gillis had been careful about who he targeted: couples without children, solo travelers, people who seemed disconnected from others. In his journal he'd written, "Highway motels are perfect hunting grounds. People check in, giving you their names, vehicle information. They sleep deeply after long drives, and if they don't check out, most people assume they just continued their journey. The highway both delivers them to you and erases your tracks. The investigation consumed months of my life. I developed a cross-jurisdictional alert system for disappearances along highway corridors. Though I'm retired now, I still keep a map marking 27 similar roadside motels across the Southwest. We never found all the people mentioned in Gillis's journal. Some entries were vague, just descriptions without names. I'm convinced the Desert Pines wasn't his first operation. The level of sophistication suggests years of practice. Sometimes I lie awake wondering how many other Vernon Gillises are out there, managing forgotten motels on lonely stretches of highway. The Desert Pines Motel was demolished 6 months after we closed the investigation. Nothing stands there now except a chain-link fence and warning signs. But every time I drive past that empty lot, I think about those tunnels still running underground, silent passages now leading nowhere. And I think about the Chens and all the others who checked in, never suspecting that the quiet, unremarkable man handing them their room key was watching them, evaluating them, deciding their fate. I think about them falling asleep in those beds, unaware of the predator beneath the floor, waiting for the right moment to emerge from the darkness. The highway motel, that staple of American travel, will never look the same to me again. When I'm on the road now and night falls, I keep driving until I reach a populated area. Some places aren't worth the risk, no matter how tired you are. Story 11. I still wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, my heart racing, convinced someone is standing in the darkness of my bedroom. I've been a detective with the Alton PD for 11 years now, but this case, this one changed me. It started in July of 2013 with what seemed like a routine call. Margaret Wilson, 64, found dead in her home on Elm Street. Nothing suspicious at first glance, just an elderly woman who had passed away in her sleep. I remember walking through her modest home that morning. Everything was in its place, her reading glasses on the nightstand next to a dog-eared mystery novel, a cup of tea, cold and untouched. The medical examiner initially ruled it natural causes, not unusual for someone her age, living alone. But something felt off. I can't explain it exactly, but after years on the force, you develop a sense for when things aren't quite right. I requested a full autopsy, much to the annoyance of my lieutenant who thought I was wasting department resources. 3 days later, the ME called me. "Martinez, you were right to push this." He found microscopic fabric fibers in Margaret's airways. Fibers that matched her pillowcase, subtle bruising around her nose and mouth that hadn't been visible at the scene. But here's what really got me. When I went back to her house to take another look, I noticed all the circuit breakers had been switched off. Every single one. Not tripped, but deliberately switched to the off position. I remember standing in her utility closet, staring at that breaker panel, feeling a chill run up my spine despite the July heat. Why would an elderly woman shut off all power to her home before going to bed? A month later, it happened again. Thomas Perkins, 71, found by his daughter during a routine check-in. Same scenario, appeared to be natural causes, but when I insisted on an autopsy, we found the same fibers, the same subtle bruising. And again, all circuit breakers switched off. By September, we had a third victim. Helen Grant, 68, lived alone in a small bungalow on the north side of town. Her neighbor called it in when she didn't show up for their weekly coffee date. The scene was identical, a body that looked peaceful, as if she'd simply died in her sleep. But I knew better now. I checked the breaker panel immediately. All switches down. I started pulling records, looking for any connection between the victims besides age and living alone. They shopped at different stores, attended different churches, had different doctors. The only pattern I could find was in the utility records. Each death was preceded by a brief localized power outage affecting just a few homes between 1 and 2 in the morning. These weren't widespread blackouts that would trigger emergency responses. Just small, isolated outages affecting 3 or 4 houses at most. The kind that would make someone wake up, fumble for a flashlight, maybe call the power company, and then go back to bed assuming it would be fixed by morning. I set up a system with the local utility company to alert me to any similar outages. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then on a Tuesday in October at 1:15 in the morning, my phone rang. The utility company reported a localized outage on Maple Drive. 4 houses affected, including the home of Elaine Carson, a 70-year-old widow who lived alone. I called for backup and drove there immediately, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The street was completely dark when I arrived. No street lights, no porch lights, nothing but the beam of my flashlight cutting through the blackness. I parked a block away and approached on foot, not wanting to alert anyone to my presence. As I neared Elaine's house, I noticed a utility van parked down the street. No company markings, no logo, just a plain white van that wouldn't attract attention. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I radioed my backup to approach without sirens. I moved quietly to the back of the house, my gun drawn now. Through the kitchen window, I could see a beam of light moving inside. Not the steady beam of a flashlight, but the dim glow of a headlamp. Someone was inside, moving deliberately through the darkness. When backup arrived, we surrounded the house. The back door was unlocked, no signs of forced entry. We entered silently, following the faint glow of that headlamp. We found him in the hallway outside Elaine's bedroom, a man dressed in what looked like a utility worker's uniform, complete with a tool belt. He froze when our flashlights hit him, like a deer caught in headlights. Michael Reeves, 47 years old, former line technician for the local power company until he was fired 3 years earlier for erratic behavior. He didn't resist arrest, didn't say a word as we cuffed him. His expression was eerily calm, almost bored. Elaine was unharmed, still asleep in her bedroom. She never even knew he was there. The search of Reeves's home turned my stomach. He had a detailed notebook with names, addresses, daily routines. Margaret, Thomas, Helen, they were all in there, along with at least 5 other names we hadn't connected yet. He had floor plans of their homes, notes about which windows were left unlocked, which floorboards creaked. In the garage, we found specialized equipment for causing targeted power outages without affecting the main grid, the kind of knowledge only someone with his training would have. During interrogation, Reeves was unnervingly methodical in describing his process. He would cause the small, isolated blackouts, then wait. If the resident called the power company, he would identify himself as a technician responding to the outage. If they didn't call but simply went back to bed, he would enter through an unlocked window or door. Elderly people living alone often became lax about security, he explained, as if teaching a class. Once inside, his first stop was always the breaker panel. He would switch off every circuit, ensuring the house would remain dark even if power was restored to the neighborhood. Then he would wait, sometimes for hours, sitting motionless in a corner of the bedroom, watching his victims sleep. I wanted them to know something was wrong, he told me, his voice flat, emotionless. I wanted them to wake up disoriented in the pitch black, to feel that moment of confusion turn to fear. When they reached for the lamp that wouldn't turn on. When they called out, and nobody answered. He would wait until they settled back down, until their breathing evened out, but before they fully returned to sleep. That's when he would move, pressing their own pillows over their faces with careful, measured pressure. Not enough to leave obvious marks, but enough to slowly suffocate them while they were too weak and disoriented to fight back effectively. I wanted them fully aware, he said, leaning forward across the table. I wanted to be the last thing they ever sensed, even if they couldn't see me. The psychological evaluation revealed classic psychopathic traits combined with a power fixation, likely triggered by his termination from the utility company. Being fired had stripped him of his identity as someone who controlled a vital resource. These murders were his way of reclaiming that power, literally keeping people in the dark, controlling their environment, and ultimately, their lives. We eventually connected him to 8 deaths across 3 states. 8 elderly people who died alone in the dark, their last moments filled with confusion and terror. The trial was mercifully quick. Reeves seemed almost proud as the evidence mounted against him, sitting straight-backed and attentive as I testified about finding him in Elaine's house that night. When the judge handed down the sentence, life imprisonment without possibility of parole, he simply nodded, as if receiving expected news about the weather. After the trial, I helped establish a community outreach program for at-risk seniors. We installed better security systems, set up check-in protocols, created a database to flag unusual power outages. Small measures that might prevent something like this from happening again. But the case left its mark on me. I installed the most sophisticated security system available in my own home. I keep flashlights in every room. I check and double-check my windows and doors before bed. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, when the house settles and makes those ordinary creaking sounds that houses make, I lie awake, listening. Because I know now what Michael Reeves taught me, that darkness isn't empty. Sometimes it's occupied by someone waiting, watching, perfectly still and silent. Someone who knows exactly how long to wait until you convince yourself there's nothing to fear, until you close your eyes again, vulnerable in your false sense of security. I keep a flashlight under my pillow now, and sometimes, when I jerk awake at 3 in the morning, heart racing, I don't immediately turn it on. Instead, I listen, straining to hear the sound of someone else's breathing in the darkness of my room. Because the most terrifying thing about Michael Reeves wasn't just what he did, it was how long he waited in the dark before he did it. And the truly haunting question that keeps me awake some nights: how many times did he enter homes and then leave without harming anyone, simply enjoying the power of being there, unseen and unsuspected? How many people never knew they had been watched in their most vulnerable moments by a man who was simply practicing, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? We'll never know. He won't tell us. And that uncertainty, that lingering doubt about the safety of our most private spaces, that's the real legacy of the case. That's what still makes me check my breaker panel every night before bed, and why I keep the blinds drawn even on the brightest days. Because some darkness doesn't come from outside. Some darkness is deliberately created by someone who understands exactly how frightening it can be. Story 12. I still can't believe what happened to me last October. I've been a real estate agent in Cravens Mill, Minnesota for 5 years now, and I've always stuck to selling modest family homes and small properties. Nothing fancy, just honest work with decent commissions. But I was getting tired of the same old listings. I wanted more. When the Watterson house went up for sale last summer, Everyone in my office was talking about it. This massive Victorian on Midnight Lake had been in the same family for like 100 years or something. Old money, the kind of listing that would put me on the map for luxury properties. The price had already been reduced a couple times, and no one seemed able to close the deal. I remember walking into my manager's office, practically begging for the listing. "Give me a shot at the Watterson place. I can sell it." He looked skeptical, but agreed. "It's been 4 months without a single offer, Sarah. If you can move that white elephant, I'll put you on our luxury division." The property photos looked amazing. 3 stories of classic Victorian architecture, private dock, panoramic lake views, 5 bedrooms, a massive stone fireplace. But something felt off when I first visited. The house was beautiful, but the air felt heavy inside, like the silence was too thick. After 3 more weeks without interest from buyers, I decided I needed to understand the property better. My friend Michael works as an architectural consultant, and I convinced him to spend a weekend there with me. "We'll check out the structure, take better photos, maybe stage it differently," I told him. Really, I just didn't want to stay there alone. We arrived on a Friday afternoon in late October. The trees around Midnight Lake were in full autumn color, but there was something unsettling about how still the water was. Not a ripple, not a bird. I remember thinking it was like looking at a photograph of a lake rather than an actual one. Michael was immediately obsessed with the craftsmanship. "Look at these banisters. This is all original hardwood. They don't build like this anymore." He went around taking measurements and photos while I set up my laptop at the dining room table to review comparable properties. That first evening was actually pleasant. We ordered pizza, drank some wine, and I started to think my weird feelings about the place were just in my head. Around 11, we each went to our separate bedrooms. He took one on the 2nd floor, and I took the master on the 3rd. I had trouble falling asleep. The house made all those normal old house noises, creaking and settling. But around 2 in the morning, I heard something else. Water, like gentle waves lapping against the shore, which was weird because the lake had been completely still all day. The sound got louder and louder until it sounded like it was right outside my window. I checked my phone. It was exactly 3:17 in the morning when I felt something cold touch my feet. Water. There was actual water seeping into my room, pooling on the hardwood floor. I jumped up and turned on the light. The wall facing the lake, the wall that was at least 50 feet from the actual shoreline, was leaking. Water was coming through what looked like solid wood paneling. I ran down to wake Michael, and by the time we got back upstairs, the water was gone. Just a small damp patch on the floor that he said was probably condensation. "Old houses get humidity issues," he explained, but I could tell he was just trying to calm me down. The next morning, I was making coffee when there was a knock at the door. An elderly woman stood there, bundled in a thick cardigan despite the mild weather. She introduced herself as Eleanor Marsh and said she lived across the lake. "I saw lights on last night," she said, her eyes darting past me to look inside. "Nobody's stayed here in years." I invited her in and explained we were preparing to sell the house. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly as she accepted the coffee I offered. "You should know about this place," she said. "I've lived on this lake for 60 years. I was here when it happened." "When what happened?" I asked. "The Watterson children. All 3 of them drowned in '87. A boating accident." She looked down at her coffee. 7, 9, and 12 years old. Their father took them out fishing, and the boat capsized. He survived. They didn't. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "That's awful," I said. "The strangest thing was how they found them," she continued. "They dragged the lake for 2 days. When they finally recovered the bodies, they were arranged in a perfect triangle formation, holding hands. The dive team said it wasn't natural. Bodies in drowning cases don't end up like that." Michael had joined us by this point. "Did the family stay here after that happened?" he asked. Eleanor nodded. "For a while, but strange things started happening. Water damage inside the house with no explanation. Children's toys and clothes washing up on the shore. And the lake." She paused. "The lake would rise, but only around their property, especially on the anniversary of the drowning. Mrs. Watterson started saying she could see them at night. Her children, standing at the water's edge, dripping wet, trying to speak to her. Mr. Watterson didn't believe her until he saw them too. He had a heart attack the following spring, died right on the dock. After that, his widow moved back to Boston, said she'd never set foot in Minnesota again." After Eleanor left, Michael tried to laugh it off. "Every old house has stories," he said. But I noticed he spent the rest of the day inside, no longer interested in examining the exterior. That evening, I was standing at the kitchen window when I noticed something on the lake. 3 perfectly spaced ripples moving toward the shore. No wind, no boats, just 3 distinct circular patterns in the water. I called Michael over, but by the time he got there, the lake was still again. As night fell, the house grew cold. The heating was running. We could hear it, but it made no difference. By 10, we were both wearing our coats inside. At 11:43 exactly, I remember checking my phone. We heard water running, not just from one place, from everywhere. Every faucet, every toilet, every shower in the house had turned on, simultaneously. Michael ran upstairs to check the bathrooms while I went to the kitchen sink. The water was ice cold and had a faint smell, like algae. I looked out the window toward the lake and froze. There were 3 small figures standing at the water's edge. They were too far away to see clearly in the darkness, but they were child-sized and perfectly still, facing the house. "Michael!" I screamed. He came running downstairs. "The water's all turned off now," he said. "Must have been a pressure surge in the—" "Look," I interrupted, pointing to the shore. "There's someone out there." He squinted through the window, then grabbed a flashlight. "I'll go check." "Don't." I grabbed his arm, but he shook me off. "It's probably just some local kids playing pranks. Eleanor probably told the whole town we're here." I watched from the window as he walked down to the shore, his flashlight beam bouncing across the ground. He reached the water's edge and looked around, then waded in a few steps, shining the light across the surface. After a few minutes, he turned and walked back to the house. When he came inside, his face was ashen. He was soaking wet from the knees down. "There's nobody there," he said, his voice strange and flat. "But I saw them," I insisted. 3 kids." He shook his head. "I went into the water to check, and I heard—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I heard voices, coming from under the water." "What were they saying?" I whispered. "It's not deep enough to save you." His eyes met mine. "We need to leave. Now." We threw our stuff into our bags and ran to the car. Neither of us spoke until we were miles away from Midnight Lake. We got hotel rooms in the next town over, and in the morning, I called my boss to explain why I couldn't handle the Watterson listing anymore. 3 days later, Midnight Lake flooded. News reports said it was due to excessive rainfall upstream, but locals noted something odd. The flooding was worst around the Watterson house, with water reaching the 2nd floor. The rest of the lake rose only a few feet. I thought that was the end of it until I got a call from a contractor who'd been hired to assess the damage. They'd found something in the basement while checking the foundation. 3 sets of small footprints, he said, embedded in the concrete, all facing inward like they were walking into the house. We carbon dated a sample. The concrete was poured in '87, shortly after those kids drowned. I later tracked down the only surviving member of the construction crew that had renovated the basement that year. He was in his 70s now, living in a nursing home in St. Paul. Mr. Watterson insisted on pouring that concrete himself, the old man told me. Sent us all home early that night, said it was a family matter, something about making sure his children would always have a way home. The Watterson house is still on the market. No one will buy it. Engineers can't explain why water damage keeps occurring inside, always concentrated around thresholds and windows, places where someone might enter. I quit real estate last month. Some properties are just not meant to be sold, and some homes never forget the families that lived there, especially when they're still trying to come back. Story 13. I've always been the outdoorsy type. Grew up in Pittsburgh, but never felt at home with all that concrete and noise. So when I finally had enough money saved up 3 years ago, I bought this small cabin in the Appalachian Mountains about 4 hours from the city. It's nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a modest kitchen, living room with a fireplace, and a wraparound porch that gives me a view of nothing but trees for miles. Paradise, if you ask me. My brother Tom still lives in the city with his wife and their 2 boys, Jason, 8, and Mikey, 5. Since I moved out here, I've made it a tradition to have the boys stay with me one weekend every month. Tom and Sarah get a break, and I get to show my nephews what real living is like. Hiking trails, fishing in the creek, identifying animal tracks, that kind of stuff. What happened last month still keeps me up at night. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, trying to make sense of it, but I can't. I'm only writing this down because I need to get it out of my system, and maybe someone out there has experienced something similar. It was the second weekend of July, hot as hell even up in the mountains. The boys arrived Friday evening, and we spent Saturday hiking and swimming in the creek. By evening, we were all exhausted. After dinner, hot dogs cooked over the fire pit. We were sitting on the porch watching fireflies when Mikey, the younger one, started talking about his new friend. "Uncle Rob, can Juliana come play with us tomorrow?" he asked, completely out of the blue. I remember looking at Jason, who just shrugged. "Who's Juliana, buddy?" I asked Mikey. "She lives in the mountains. She told me she wants to play with me," he said, matter-of-factly, like he was telling me what he had for lunch. Now, I know kids have imaginary friends. My niece went through that phase when she was 4, talking to her friend Sarah, who supposedly lived in their closet. So I didn't think much of it. "Sure, Juliana can come play tomorrow," I said, ruffling his hair. "Where did you meet her?" Mikey pointed toward the tree line at the edge of my property, where the forest gets thick. "She was there this morning when we were playing. She waved at me." That gave me pause. We hadn't seen anyone all day, and my nearest neighbor is over 3 miles away. "Was she with her parents?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Mikey shook his head. "She said she lives alone. She's a big girl." I exchanged glances with Jason, who was now looking uncomfortable. "Did you see this girl too?" I asked him. "No," Jason said, looking at his brother like he was crazy. "There was nobody there." Imaginary friend, I told myself. Just an imaginary friend. Still, something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I decided to change the subject and suggested we head inside for some ice cream before bed. After getting the boys settled in the guest bedroom, I locked up the cabin and sat down in the living room with a beer. It was around 10:30, and through the open window, I could hear the chorus of cicadas and frogs that makes up the nighttime soundtrack out here. The boys' bedroom was just down the hall, and I'd left their door cracked open in case they needed anything during the night. I must have dozed off on the couch because I woke up suddenly around midnight. At first, I wasn't sure what had woken me. Then I heard it, a child's voice, humming. It was faint but clear, coming from outside. My first thought was that one of the boys had somehow gotten out, but when I rushed to check their room, both were sound asleep in their beds. The humming continued, a simple, repetitive tune that sent chills down my spine. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out onto the porch. The night was still, except for that humming, which seemed to be coming from the tree line Mikey had pointed to earlier. I swept my flashlight beam across the yard and froze when it caught a small figure standing at the edge of the woods. It was a little girl, couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. She had long, dark hair and was wearing what looked like a white nightgown. She was just standing there, swaying slightly as she hummed. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding strangely loud in the quiet night. "Are you lost?" The girl stopped humming and turned to look at me. Even from a distance, I could see she was smiling. She raised her hand and beckoned to me, then turned and walked deeper into the trees. My mind was racing. A child alone in the woods at midnight? It didn't make sense. Maybe she'd wandered away from a campsite, though I didn't know of any campgrounds nearby. Whatever the explanation, I couldn't just leave her out there. I went back inside, grabbed my phone and a jacket, and locked the door behind me. The boys were still sound asleep, and I figured I'd only be gone a few minutes, just long enough to find out where this girl had come from. As I approached the tree line, I could still hear her humming, the sound floating back to me through the darkness. I followed it, moving carefully through the underbrush, my flashlight beam bouncing off tree trunks and casting weird shadows all around me. "Hello?" I called again. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help you find your parents." The humming stopped, and for a moment I thought I'd lost her. Then I caught a glimpse of white through the trees, maybe 50 yards ahead of me. I pushed forward, branches scratching at my face and arms. I don't know how long I followed her. It felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes or so. She always stayed just ahead of me, visible enough that I knew I wasn't imagining her, but never close enough for me to catch up. At one point, I stopped and called the local police on my cell phone. I explained the situation, that I'd found a young girl alone in the woods near my cabin, and I was trying to help her. The dispatcher told me to stay where I was, that they'd send officers to my location based on my phone's GPS. But just as I hung up, I spotted the girl again, standing in a small clearing ahead. This time, she wasn't moving away. She was just standing there, watching me, still with that smile on her face. As I approached, she turned and seemed to disappear between 2 large rocks. When I reached the spot, I found a narrow opening, not quite a cave, more like a crevice between boulders. It was dark inside, but I could hear movement. "Hey," I said softly, crouching down to peer into the opening. "It's okay. I'm here to help. Are you Juliana?" Silence. Then, very faintly, I heard humming again, coming from inside the crevice. I was torn. On one hand, I didn't want to frighten her by crawling in after her. On the other hand, I couldn't just leave her there. I decided to wait for the police to arrive. They'd have better equipment, maybe even a female officer who might be less intimidating to a little girl. I called the police again to update them on my location. That's when everything went to hell. "Sir," the dispatcher said, her voice tense, "we have officers at your cabin right now. There's been a break-in. Are your nephews still inside?" My blood ran cold. "Yes," I said, already on my feet and running back the way I'd come. "They're asleep in the bedroom." "What do you mean, a break-in?" "The officers responded to a 911 call from your residence. When they arrived, they found your front door broken open." I don't remember much of the run back to my cabin. I just remember the blind panic, the branches whipping against my face, the roots trying to trip me in the darkness. All I could think about was Jason and Mikey, alone in that cabin. When I finally burst out of the tree line, my property was lit up with police cruiser lights. 4 officers were there, 2 inside and 2 securing the perimeter. My front door was completely shattered, splinters of wood scattered across the porch. I rushed inside, shouting the boys' names. An officer tried to stop me, but I pushed past him. What I saw made my legs give out. The living room was destroyed, furniture overturned, pictures ripped from walls. But what really got to me were the marks, deep gouges in the walls, like something had tried to claw its way through. They weren't random. They formed patterns, almost like symbols, but nothing I recognized. And the bedroom door, the boys' bedroom door, had been nearly broken down. The wood was splintered and cracked, with more of those strange scratch marks all over it. But the boys were safe, terrified, huddled together in the corner of their room, but physically unharmed. According to the officers, they'd received a 911 call from my landline, just heavy breathing, then a child's voice saying, "Help us," before the line went dead. When they arrived about 15 minutes later, they found the front door broken and heard something large moving around inside. Whatever it was, escaped through the back before they could see it. The boys said they'd woken up to loud banging on their bedroom door. They'd been too scared to open it or even call out. Jason, smart kid that he is, had wedged a chair under the doorknob and called 911 on the room's landline phone. They said they heard scratching and what sounded like whispering outside their door for several minutes before the police arrived. We spent the rest of the night at the police station. Wildlife experts were called in the next morning to examine the damage. They couldn't identify what kind of animal could have caused it. The claw marks were too large for a bear, too systematic for any known predator, and no animal they knew of could have shattered a solid oak door like mine had been. As for the girl in the woods, search teams found nothing. No footprints, no signs of a child having been there at all. The crevice I'd seen her disappear into turned out to be only about 3 feet deep, not big enough for a child to hide in, let alone live in. I still have no explanation for what happened that night. But in my darkest thoughts, I can't shake the feeling that Juliana, whoever or whatever she was, deliberately lured me away from the cabin so that something could get to my nephews. I've since moved back to Pittsburgh. The cabin is up for sale, though I doubt anyone will buy it in its current condition. The boys stay with me sometimes, but they never mention that night, and I don't bring it up. Mikey doesn't talk about Juliana anymore, but sometimes late at night, I still hear that humming. Story 14. I keep trying to write this all down, but it's hard. My therapist says it might help, but how do you explain something when you're not even sure what happened yourself? I'm Officer Marcus Thompson. At least I was. Seattle PD, 5 years on the force. Now, I don't know what I am anymore. It was Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2023. Shitty night to be working, but Rachel and I were both single, so we volunteered for the graveyard shift. Rachel Kim, my partner, smart as hell, always had my back. We'd been riding together for almost 2 years. It started with a call around 2:30 in the morning. Dispatch reported strange noises coming from a maintenance access point near Pioneer Square. Probably nothing. Homeless people seeking shelter, maybe kids messing around. Standard stuff. We responded, figuring we'd check it out, tell whoever it was to move along, and grab coffee after. When we got there, I remember checking my watch. 2:34 a.m. exactly. I remember because Rachel made some joke about the numbers adding up to 9 and how her grandmother would say that was lucky. The maintenance hatch was unsealed, which was unusual. Those things are typically locked down tight. Probably public works, Rachel said, but she sounded uncertain. We called it in, letting dispatch know we were going to check it out. Protocol, you know. Always let someone know where you are. The hatch led down to what looked like a normal utility tunnel. Concrete walls, pipes running along the ceiling, the smell of dampness and city grime. Nothing out of the ordinary. We turned on our flashlights and started walking. The tunnel was cold, much colder than it should have been, even in February. Our breath came out in white clouds. About 10 minutes in, I remember Rachel checking her watch and saying it was 2:45. We found something that made no sense. The tunnel opened up into a fully equipped police substation. Not a temporary setup, not a security office. A full-blown SPD substation with desks, computers, radios, everything. Rachel keyed her radio. Dispatch, this is Officer Kim. We found what appears to be a police substation down here. Can you confirm if we have any underground facilities in this area? The radio crackled, the dispatcher's voice coming through clearly. Negative, officers. No substation should be present at that location. Rachel and I exchanged glances. The place looked official. SPD logos on the wall, proper equipment, everything up to code. But it wasn't on any maps, and dispatch had no record of it. We should look around, I said, and Rachel nodded. That's the last normal decision I remember making. The substation was fully powered, lights on, computers humming, but it was empty. No officers, no staff, just waiting, like a movie set. I remember touching one of the desks and feeling this weird static electricity. Rachel was checking the computer screens, which displayed active case files. Some I recognized from our precinct, others I'd never seen before. "Marcus," Rachel called out, her voice tight. "Look at this." She was pointing at a duty roster on the wall. It listed officers by name and badge number with shift times. Our names were on it. Rachel Kim and Marcus Thompson, scheduled for the 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. shift. But there were other names too, officers I'd never heard of. And the dates next to them, some were from the past, 1950-something, 1978. Others had dates that couldn't be right, 2047, 2147. "This is some kind of joke," I said, but my mouth was dry. I keyed my radio to call it in, but all I got was static. Rachel tried hers too. Nothing. "Signal's dead down here," she said. "Let's head back up, get back up." We turned to leave, but the tunnel we'd come through wasn't there anymore. Instead, there were 5 identical tunnels leading out from the substation. None of them looked familiar. "Which one did we come through?" Rachel asked, and I could hear the first hints of panic in her voice. I don't know," I admitted. "Let's just pick one and follow it up." We chose the tunnel that seemed to head in the right direction, but it didn't lead up. It just kept going, level, farther and farther under the city, and it started changing as we walked. The modern conduit pipes gradually gave way to older infrastructure. Gas lamps appeared on the walls, actual gas lamps, with flames flickering inside glass casings, but right next to them were fiber optic cables, glowing with data transfer. "This isn't possible," Rachel kept saying. I didn't argue with her. It wasn't possible. None of it made sense. We walked for what felt like hours, though my watch said only 20 minutes had passed. The tunnel finally opened into a large circular room with 7 tunnels branching off like spokes on a wheel. Each tunnel had different technology running through it. One had telegraph wires, another had what looked like futuristic glowing panels. The central room itself was, I don't know how to describe it. It was like a police station from every era all at once. There was a wooden desk that looked straight out of the 1800s, with an old-fashioned blotter and inkwell. Next to it sat a 1970s metal desk with a typewriter, then a modern computer workstation, and beside that, something sleek and holographic that I couldn't even understand. All of it was arranged in a perfect circle, facing inward. In the center of the room was a pedestal with badges arranged on it, police badges from different eras of Seattle's history. And right in the middle were our badges, Rachel's and mine. Not copies, our actual badges. I reached for mine instinctively, and that's when I realized it was missing from my uniform. "Marcus," Rachel whispered, her voice shaking. She was pointing at our service weapons, arranged ceremonially next to the badges. I checked my holster, empty. I hadn't even noticed. There were other badges too. Some looked ancient, others modern, a few like nothing I'd ever seen before, sleek and made of materials I couldn't identify. Next to each badge was a small plaque with a name and 2 dates. I found one for Officer Michael Callahan, 1952, and another for Sergeant Anita Washington, 2001. And there, freshly engraved, Officer Rachel Kim, 2023, and Officer Marcus Thompson, 2023. The second date was blank. That's when I heard footsteps, not just from one tunnel, but from several. Rachel and I backed up against each other, hands automatically going for weapons that weren't there. They came from the tunnels, one by one. Police officers, but from different times. A man in an old-fashioned uniform with a high collar and brass buttons, carrying a nightstick. A woman in 1980s SPD blues. A couple in modern tactical gear like ours. And 2 figures in sleek gray uniforms I'd never seen before, with badges that glowed slightly in the dim light. They didn't seem surprised to see us. They nodded in acknowledgement, as if we were just colleagues passing in the hallway. I tried to speak to them, but when I approached the officer in the old-fashioned uniform, he simply walked right through a solid wall as if it wasn't there. Rachel grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. "Did you see that?" she hissed. "Am I losing my mind?" "If you are, so am I said. We tried to orient ourselves to find a way out. Rachel had a compass in her pocket, department issue. When she took it out, the needle just spun wildly around and around. I checked my phone. No signal, but the GPS was going crazy, showing coordinates that kept changing rapidly, jumping all over Seattle's map. That's when everything electronic started malfunctioning. My watch stopped at 3:33, then began running backward. The lights flickered, dimming and brightening in a rhythm that made my head hurt. I felt dizzy, like the room was spinning. "We need to get out of here," Rachel said, pulling me toward one of the tunnels. "Now." We picked the tunnel that seemed newest, hoping it would lead back to our time. We ran, the tunnel stretching endlessly ahead. The walls began to blur as we moved, shifting between different states. Sometimes modern concrete, sometimes old brick, sometimes something crystalline I couldn't identify. I don't know how long we ran. My watch was useless. Time didn't make sense anymore. Eventually, we came to another room, smaller than the first. There was a desk with a logbook open on it. Rachel approached it cautiously. "It's a duty roster," she said, "for something called the Temporal Police Force." I looked over her shoulder. The book listed assignments by year, officers dispatched to specific dates and locations throughout Seattle's history. And there we were again. Officers Kim and Thompson, orientation and training, beginning February 14th, 2023. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. Rachel was about to answer when a voice came from behind us. "Your new assignment." We spun around. A man in a uniform I'd never seen stood in the doorway. His badge resembled ours, but with symbols I didn't recognize etched into the metal. He looked to be in his 50s, with gray at his temples and lines around his eyes. "I'm Captain Reeves," he said. "Temporal Division. We've been expecting you." "What is this place?" Rachel demanded. "Who are you people?" "This is the junction," Captain Reeves said, as if that explained everything. "The point where Seattle's timeline converges, and we are its caretakers," he explained, though I still don't understand it all. Something about temporal anomalies beneath Pioneer Square, about how Seattle's history doesn't flow in a straight line like most places. How the department had discovered this decades or centuries ago and established a special division to monitor it. "Time runs differently here," he said. "Officers who find their way to the junction are chosen to serve across Seattle's timeline, to maintain order throughout its history." "That's insane," I said. "We're just regular cops. We have lives up there." Captain Reeves looked sad. "Had," he corrected gently. "Time has already moved on without you. It always does." That's when we heard the radio chatter. Voices calling our names, search teams being organized. They were looking for us on the surface. "Your colleagues won't find you," Reeves said. "Not in the way they're hoping." "I'm not staying here," Rachel said firmly. "I'm going back." She turned to me. "Marcus, come on." She ran for the tunnel we'd come through, but when I tried to follow, I couldn't move. It was like my feet were rooted to the floor. I called after her, but my voice made no sound. I watched her disappear into the darkness. Captain Reeves put his hand on my shoulder. "She'll be back," he said. "They always come back. The junction doesn't let go that easily." I wanted to punch him, to scream, to demand answers, but all I could do was stand there. The room started to fade around me, the walls becoming transparent, showing glimpses of Seattle through different eras. Horse-drawn carriages on muddy streets, the Great Fire of 1889, modern skyscrapers, and strange crystalline structures I couldn't comprehend. "Your orientation begins now," Reeves said, handing me a badge. It looked like my SPD badge, but when I turned it over, the back was inscribed with dates spanning centuries. "You'll understand soon enough." That was, I don't know how long ago it was. Time doesn't work right down here. I patrol the tunnels now, walking beats in 1899 one day and 2078 the next. I catch glimpses of Rachel sometimes, in other tunnels, other times. We call to each other on the radio, but we haven't been in the same place at the same time since that first day. I've tried to make contact with the surface. I send reports through the radio system, help with cases when I can. Sometimes I hear them talking about ghost transmissions from missing officers. They don't understand. We're not missing. We're still on patrol. We're just patrolling a beat that spans centuries instead of city blocks. I don't know if I'll ever find my way back. The captain says some officers have, that they've returned to the surface after serving their time. But they're never the same. How could they be? If anyone finds this, if anyone's looking for us, know that we're still out here, still doing our job, still on patrol. And if you're in Seattle and hear strange noises coming from under the streets, do yourself a favor. Don't investigate. Don't open that hatch. Just call it in and walk away. Because time doesn't flow straight under Pioneer Square. And once the junction chooses you, your badge gets 2 dates. Mine only has 1 so far. I'm still waiting for the second. Story 15. I still can't believe I made it home that night. It's been 3 months, and I wake up sometimes in a cold sweat, replaying every second in my head. I haven't told many people about this, just my wife and the police. But I need to get this off my chest somewhere. So I work as an IT consultant for a small firm in Sacramento, and I live out in a little town called Pine Grove, about 90 minutes away. It's usually a peaceful drive, but that night in January was different. We'd been scrambling to fix a server issue for a major client, and I ended up leaving the office around 11:30 at night. It was pouring rain, one of those winter storms that had been hammering Northern California for days. The fastest way home is this back road called Elm Creek Road. It cuts through farmland and winds along the foothills, saving about 20 minutes compared to the highway. Most of my co-workers take the longer route because Elm Creek has a reputation. Over the years, there have been several disappearances along that stretch. A couple years ago, a woman was found beaten after her car broke down there. The locals call it Nightmare Road for a reason, but I'd driven it hundreds of times without issue. That night, I was exhausted and just wanted to get home. My wife Jen had texted earlier saying she was worried about me driving in the storm. I assured her I'd be fine and would call when I was about halfway. The rain was coming down in sheets as I turned onto Elm Creek. My windshield wipers were going full blast, but visibility was still terrible. There are no streetlights out there, just pure darkness, broken only by my headlights reflecting off the wet asphalt. The road was empty, which wasn't surprising given the weather and the time. About 20 minutes in, my phone rang. It was Jen checking on me. I told her I was fine and would be home in about an hour. That call probably saved my life. Just after hanging up, I rounded a bend and my headlights caught someone standing on the shoulder. A man, completely soaked, holding his thumb out. My first instinct was to keep driving. Who the hell hitchhikes on a remote road close to midnight during a storm? But something made me slow down. Maybe it was fatigue clouding my judgment, or maybe it was some misplaced sense of compassion, thinking the poor guy must be desperate to be out in this weather. I pulled over about 20 feet ahead of him and watched in my rear view as he jogged up to my car. He looked to be in his mid-30s, average height, dark hair plastered to his head from the rain. Nothing particularly threatening about him. He wore jeans, boots, and a dark green jacket that was completely drenched. When I rolled down my window a crack, he smiled and said, "Man, I appreciate this so much. My truck broke down about a mile back, and in this weather," he had a slight southern drawl, Texas maybe. Against every instinct, I unlocked the doors. "Where are you headed?" I asked as he climbed in, bringing the smell of rain and wet clothes with him. "Just up to Millerton," he said, referring to a small town about 30 minutes further along my route. "My brother lives there. I was on my way to his place when my radiator decided to quit on me." I nodded and pulled back onto the road. "I'm headed past there, so that works." From the moment he sat down, something felt off. He was polite enough, but there was a tension in the air. He kept his left hand in his jacket pocket the whole time, and I noticed he wasn't actually that wet for someone who claimed to have been walking in the downpour. His hair and shoulders were soaked, but his jeans looked almost dry. We made small talk for a few minutes. He said his name was Ray and that he worked construction in Sacramento. I didn't offer much about myself beyond my first name. About 5 minutes into the drive, I caught him in my peripheral vision, staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Whenever I would glance his way, he'd quickly look forward or out the window. Then I noticed his right hand. It was partially concealed by his leg, but I could see the glow of a phone screen. He was texting someone, trying to hide it. Who the hell was he texting at midnight during a storm on a back road? My heart started pounding harder. "So your brother lives in Millerton?" I asked, trying to sound casual while my mind raced. "Yeah," he said, quickly pocketing the phone. "Just moved there, actually." "What part? I know that area pretty well." I was testing him now. There was the slightest hesitation. The north side, near the old mill." Millerton doesn't have an old mill. It's named after some founder from the 1800s. The rain had lightened slightly, and we were approaching an intersection where Elm Creek meets Parker Road. It's one of the few crossroads in that 30-mile stretch. "Actually," Ray suddenly said, pointing to the right turn, "my brother's place is just down Parker. About 2 minutes down, if you don't mind. It'd save him coming out to get me in Millerton." Parker Road is even more isolated than Elm Creek. It leads to a cluster of old farmhouses and then dead ends at the foothills. At night, it's completely deserted. "I thought your brother lived in Millerton," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. "He's staying at a friend's place tonight," Ray said smoothly. "Down this way. It's the third house on the left, just past the big oak tree." I slowed as we approached the intersection, pretending I was going to turn. That's when I noticed Ray shift his position slightly. His left hand was still in his pocket, and I suddenly had the terrible certainty there was a weapon in there. Through the rain, I could make out what looked like a dilapidated farmhouse about a quarter-mile down Parker Road. It was completely dark, except for what might have been a flashlight beam moving near the tree line. My blood went cold as everything clicked into place. This wasn't a stranded motorist. There was no broken-down truck, no brother waiting in Millerton or at a friend's house. I'd been set up. I don't know where I found the courage, but as I slowed to about 15 miles per hour approaching the turn, I made a split-second decision. I slammed on the brakes, threw the car into park, and with every ounce of strength I had, I shoved my right arm across Ray's chest and pushed him toward the passenger door. "What the fuck?" he started, but I'd already hit the unlock button and was continuing to push. "Get out!" I screamed, feeling a surge of adrenaline I didn't know was possible. He tried to grab my arm, but I managed to knock him off balance. His right shoulder hit the door, which swung open from the force and his own weight. He half fell, half stumbled out onto the wet pavement. I didn't wait to see if he got up. I slammed the gear shift into drive and floored it, blowing straight through the intersection. My tires screeched, and the car fishtailed for a terrifying moment before finding traction. In my rearview mirror, I saw Ray scrambling to his feet, pulling something from his pocket, definitely a gun. But what made my heart nearly stop was what I saw next. From the tree line by the dark farmhouse, several dark figures were emerging. I couldn't make out details through the rain and distance, but there were at least 5 of them, running toward the road. I drove like a madman, taking the curves of Elm Creek Road way too fast for the wet conditions. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I was certain they'd follow me, that at any moment I'd see headlights in my mirror gaining on me. After about 10 minutes of driving like this, I pulled over just long enough to call 911. The dispatcher kept me on the line while officers were dispatched, but by the time they reached the intersection, there was no one there. The farmhouse was abandoned, with signs that several people had been there recently. Cigarette butts, tire tracks from multiple vehicles, and a cell phone that must have been dropped in the scuffle when I pushed Ray out. The police told me they'd had reports of similar incidents in neighboring counties, crews using a hitchhiker to lure drivers to isolated spots for robbery, or worse. They found records on the phone that linked to a string of violent robberies across 3 states. I haven't driven Elm Creek Road since that night. I take the highway now, even though it adds 20 minutes to my commute. I've installed a dash cam in my car and keep the doors locked at all times. I still don't know what made me stop for that hitchhiker when I normally wouldn't have. Maybe fatigue, maybe a momentary lapse of judgment. What haunts me most is how easily I fell for it. One small decision, stopping for what seemed like someone in need, nearly cost me everything. I think about those men emerging from the trees, about what would have happened if I'd turned down Parker Road, about how close I came to becoming another statistic, another disappearance on Nightmare Road. I know I got lucky. Whatever instinct kicked in at that intersection saved my life. But 3 months later, I still check my rearview mirror constantly, and every time I see someone on the side of the road, I feel that same cold fear wash over me again. Story 16. I've been hesitant to share this for a long time. Even typing it out now makes my hands shake. But I need to get this off my chest because I still can't sleep through the night, and maybe writing about it will help me process what happened. I'm a high school English teacher in Smithtown. I've lived alone since my divorce 3 years ago in a small ranch house that backs up to a wooded area. It's usually peaceful here, or at least it was until October of 2014. It started with noises. Nothing dramatic at first, just the occasional sound of footsteps on my back deck late at night. I'd get up, check the sliding glass door, making sure it was locked, peer out into the darkness, and see nothing. I told myself it was just raccoons or deer. We get a lot of wildlife here in Suffolk County. But then the scratching started. Soft at first, almost imperceptible. It would happen around 2 or 3 in the morning, light scratching at my sliding door. I'd turn on the deck lights, and whatever was making the noise would stop immediately. After a few nights of this, I called the police. That's when I met Officer Moretti. She was in her late 30s, professional but kind. She walked around my property, checked the locks, and took my statement, but there wasn't much else she could do. No evidence of anyone trying to break in, no footprints in the soft dirt near my deck. She gave me her card and told me to call if anything else happened. A week later, I started getting phone calls. The caller ID would show unknown number, and when I answered, there would be silence. Just breathing. Sometimes I'd hear what sounded like trees rustling in the background or distant traffic. I'd hang up, block the number, but they'd call from a different one the next time. I called Officer Moretti again. She seemed concerned, but said there wasn't much they could do about anonymous calls unless there were explicit threats. She suggested I change my number, which I did. It worked for about 2 weeks. Then one night in early November, I was grading papers at my kitchen table when my new phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to. Nothing but silence, then a click as they hung up. 10 minutes later, my landline rang. I hadn't given that number to anyone except family and work. When I answered, there was just silence again. I was properly scared now. I called Officer Moretti directly and left a message. She called back the next morning and told me something that made my blood run cold. I wasn't the only one. Several other women in eastern Suffolk County had reported similar disturbances. All women living alone or with just their kids. All homes backing onto wooded areas. Moretti asked if I'd mind her coming by after her shift to install a motion-activated camera on my deck. I agreed immediately. That night she set it up, aiming it at the sliding door where I'd been hearing the scratching. She also checked all my windows and doors and suggested I get a dog. I was seriously considering it. The calls continued, but now they were coming at specific times, always when I was in the shower or right after I turned off my light to go to sleep, as if someone knew my routine. I started keeping all the blinds closed, all the time. I stopped sitting on my back deck. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. About a week before Thanksgiving, I was awakened by my phone. 3 in the morning. Unknown number. This time, when I answered, there was a sound, pages turning, like someone flipping through a book. I hung up and couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning, I found something that still makes me sick to think about. On my kitchen table was a sticky note with a line from The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, and the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain. I teach that poem to my seniors every year. My copy of the complete works of Poe was on my nightstand, not in the kitchen. Someone had been in my house while I was sleeping. I called Officer Moretti in a panic. She came right away with 2 other officers. They searched the entire house but found nothing. No signs of forced entry, nothing missing. The only evidence was that sticky note. They dusted for fingerprints, but only found mine. That's when Moretti told me about Melissa Donovan, a nurse who lived about 20 minutes from me. She had found a Polaroid of herself sleeping on her kitchen table. The photo had been taken from inside her bedroom while she was asleep. The worst part? Phone records showed that someone had used Donovan's own house phone to call my number the night before. I couldn't stay in my house after that. I packed a bag and went to my sister's place in Huntington. While I was there, Moretti called with disturbing news. She had started receiving silent calls too. In one of them, a man had whispered, "I know it's you responding, Diane." He knew her first name, which wasn't on her official identification. It was getting personal. I stayed at my sister's for 5 days before I had to go back home to get more clothes and prepare for the school week. Moretti offered to meet me there and do another sweep. When we arrived, something felt off immediately. Nothing was obviously disturbed, but tiny things were different. A coffee mug I always kept on the right side of the sink was on the left. Books on my shelf had been rearranged slightly. My toothbrush was damp. The camera Moretti had installed hadn't captured anything unusual. Either our guy was being extremely careful to avoid its view, or he had found another way in. We checked every possible entry point again and found nothing. That night, back at my sister's, I got a text from an unknown number. "The purple curtains miss you, Janet." I hadn't told anyone but Moretti about the Poe reference. I showed her the text the next day, and she looked truly alarmed for the first time. The next week, the police made a breakthrough. They identified a vehicle that had been spotted near several of the affected homes, a dark blue Honda Civic registered to a Thomas Grayson. When they ran his name, they discovered he was a former emergency dispatcher who had been fired a year earlier for inappropriate conduct with female callers. Moretti called to tell me this news, but she sounded distracted, on edge. When I pressed her, she admitted that when she'd returned home the night before, her front door had been slightly ajar. Inside, all her furniture in the living room had been rearranged to face the entrance, like someone had set up an audience. On her kitchen counter, she'd found a stack of photographs of herself, some taken while she was shopping, others while she was getting into her car at the police station. The most disturbing ones were of her inside her home, through windows, going about her daily routine. They spanned several months. I felt sick for her, but also terrified for myself. If he was targeting Moretti now, what would stop him from coming back to me? The police obtained a warrant to search Grayson's apartment. What they found was the stuff of nightmares, maps with our homes marked, surveillance photos of all of us, audio recordings of 911 calls from women who later became his targets, calls he had collected during his time as a dispatcher. He had notebooks filled with detailed observations about our daily routines. When I visited the precinct to see if I could identify anything relevant to my case, Moretti showed me a page from one of the notebooks. It contained a meticulous log of when I turned lights, on and off in different rooms of my house. The dates went back 6 months before I ever noticed anything strange. Despite all this evidence, they couldn't locate Grayson himself. He seemed to have vanished. The police put me and the other women under protection, with patrol cars driving by our homes regularly. 2 weeks went by with no sign of him. I had started to believe maybe he'd fled the state when I got a call from Moretti. Her voice was tight with urgency. "Janet, I need you to calmly pack an overnight bag and walk outside to the patrol car at the end of your driveway. Don't turn on any lights. Don't look around. Just walk directly to the car." I didn't ask questions. I grabbed my purse and a few essentials and did exactly as she said. The officer in the patrol car wouldn't tell me what was happening, just that I needed to come to the station immediately. When I arrived, Moretti was waiting. Her face was pale. "We need to talk," she said, leading me to a private room. "We found something in your house." My heart nearly stopped. "What? I was just there. What did you find?" "One of our officers noticed something unusual about the vent in your back hallway during a routine check. It had been modified. We got a search warrant and investigated further." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Janet, someone has been living in your attic. There's a sleeping bag up there, bottles of water, energy bar wrappers. They've been accessing your home through that rear vent and observing you." I couldn't process what she was saying. "What do you mean, observing me?" "There's a hole drilled in your ceiling right above your bed. It's small, easy to miss if you're not looking for it. But someone has been watching you sleep." I vomited right there in the interview room. All those nights I'd felt uneasy. All those times I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. Someone had been there, watching me all along. They caught Grayson that night, hiding in the woods, behind my house. He had a backpack with him containing a camera, a knife, and several items he'd taken from my home. A hairbrush, a scarf, a coffee mug I hadn't even noticed was missing. During his trial in January, his psychiatric evaluation revealed he suffered from erotomania. He believed he was protecting us by watching us sleep. In his twisted mind, he thought we knew about him and welcomed his presence. The silent calls were his way of connecting with us without disrupting our lives. Grayson was sentenced to 25 years, but knowing he's locked away brings little comfort. I've moved twice since then. I check my phone records obsessively for unknown numbers. I've installed security cameras everywhere. I can't sleep without checking my attic every single night. Officer Moretti transferred to a different division. We still check in with each other occasionally, but I think we both prefer not to talk about what happened. Some wounds are too deep to keep reopening. The hardest part isn't the fear that still wakes me at 3 in the morning. It's the knowledge that for months before I ever heard that first footstep, before I noticed anything wrong at all, someone was already there, watching, waiting, making himself at home in the spaces I couldn't see. How do you ever feel safe again after that? Story 17. I've been debating for months whether to share this. I'm still not sure if writing it down will help or just make everything worse. But I need to tell someone, and maybe putting it out here will help me make sense of what happened. Last summer, I took my kids, Emma, age 10, and Jake, age 8, to Aspen Shore Lodge in northern Michigan. My husband couldn't join us because of work, so it was just the three of us for a week-long vacation. I found the place online, a beautiful 2-story cedar lodge on Lake Manitou, about 4 hours from our home in Chicago. The pictures showed this gorgeous rustic building with huge windows overlooking the water, and the reviews were mostly positive. The only weird comments mentioned strange noises at night and odd dreams, but I figured that was just the usual creaky old house stuff. We arrived on a Sunday afternoon in June. The property manager, a woman named Elaine Barrett, met us there. She seemed nice enough, if a bit distracted, and quickly showed us around. The place was even more beautiful than the photos. All warm wood, comfortable furniture, and amazing lake views. The kids immediately ran outside to check out the private dock while I unpacked. "The library is through there," Elaine said, pointing to a door off the main living area. "Feel free to borrow any books, but please return them before you leave." She hesitated for a second. "And don't worry if you hear the floorboards creak in there at night. Old house, you know?" I didn't think much of it at the time. The library was gorgeous. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather chairs, a big oak desk by the window. Emma immediately found the children's section and picked out some books. The first 2 days were perfect. We swam, hiked, roasted marshmallows. The kids loved it. I started to relax for the first time in months. Then on Tuesday night, everything changed. I was in the kitchen making hot chocolate when Emma came running in, her face pale. "Mom, there's an old man in the library," she whispered, tugging my arm. "What? Are you sure it's not just shadows?" I asked, immediately concerned but trying not to show it. "No, he talked to me," she insisted. "He asked if I'd signed the book yet." My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone. Why, I don't know. What was I going to do? Take a picture? And walked to the library. Jake followed behind us, curious but nervous. The library was empty. No sign of anyone. I checked everywhere. Behind curtains, under the desk, even in the closet. Nothing. "He was right there." Emma pointed to the space between the desk and the window. He was old with white hair and a gray suit. He smiled at me and asked if I signed the book yet. "What book?" I asked. She shrugged. "I don't know. I got scared and ran." I searched the desk and found nothing but some stationery and pens. We checked all the doors and windows. Everything was locked. I convinced myself Emma had fallen asleep reading and had a dream, though she insisted she hadn't been asleep. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me jump. Around 3 in the morning, I heard what sounded like footsteps in the library below our bedroom. I lay there, paralyzed, listening as they moved across the floor, then stopped. I almost convinced myself I was imagining things when I heard what sounded like pages turning. In the morning, I called Elaine and casually asked if anyone else had access to the house. She seemed uncomfortable with the question. "No, no one else has keys except the cleaning staff, and they only come between guest stays," she said. After a pause, she added, "Did you see someone?" When I told her about Emma's experience, she went quiet. "You're not the first to mention this," she finally admitted. "Other guests have reported similar things. We've had the house checked for security issues multiple times, but they never find anything wrong." "So you're saying the place is haunted?" I tried to keep the edge out of my voice. "I wouldn't use that word," she said carefully, "but the house has history. It was built in 1975 by my father, but there was another lodge here before that, the Manitou Lodge. It burned down in the 50s. She offered to refund our stay if we wanted to leave early, but the kids were having so much fun during the day that I decided to stay. I just made sure we were all in the same bedroom at night with the door locked. On Thursday, things escalated. We'd been out on the lake all day in a rental boat and came back exhausted around sunset. As I was making dinner, Jake came running into the kitchen. "Mom, the floor in the library is moving." I dropped what I was doing and ran after him. In the library, one of the floorboards near the desk was slightly raised, as if someone was pushing it up from below. As we watched, it settled back into place. My first thought was animals. Maybe raccoons had gotten under the house. But then Emma pointed to the desk. "Look at the pen." A ballpoint pen was standing upright on the desk, perfectly balanced on its tip. As we stared, it fell over with a soft click. I grabbed the kids and we went back to the kitchen. I called Elaine again, this time demanding answers. "There's something you're not telling me about this place," I said, trying to keep my voice down so the kids wouldn't hear. "What's going on with the library?" She sighed deeply. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. When she arrived, she brought a folder of papers and a flashlight. She asked the kids to stay in the living room while she took me to the library. "My father never told me this until he was dying," she began, moving the desk aside. "The original Manitou Lodge had a tradition. Every guest signed a special register when they arrived." She knelt down and pried up the loose floorboard, revealing a small space underneath. Inside was a leather-bound book, old and worn. In 1932, 11 people from a wedding party drowned during a late-night boat ride on the lake, she continued, carefully lifting out the book. They'd all signed this register earlier that day. She opened it, showing me yellowed pages filled with signatures. She flipped to a page marked July 17th, 1932. 11 signatures, all in different handwriting. The owner at the time, William Blackwood, was going bankrupt. After the accident, he received a massive insurance payout. My skin crawled. "Are you saying he killed them?" Nobody could prove anything. But local stories say Blackwood told guests that signing the register meant becoming part of Lake Manitou forever. She flipped through more pages, showing me signatures that continued well past 1951, when the original lodge burned down. The last signature was dated just 3 months ago. "People who've stayed here, they sometimes find this book on their own, and some of them sign it." She looked troubled. "And then they report dreams of drowning." "This is insane," I whispered. "Why would you keep renting this place out?" "I've tried to sell it 3 times, she said. "Each time the sale falls through at the last minute. I've had the book removed, burned, even thrown into the lake once. It always comes back." As if on cue, we heard a splash from outside. We both turned toward the window. The lake, which had been calm all day, now had ripples spreading from the center, as if something large had surfaced. "We're leaving," I said immediately. "Tonight." Elaine nodded. "I'll refund your entire stay." I packed our things in record time, while Elaine waited in the living room with the kids. As I was throwing the last items into our suitcase, I realized Emma wasn't with Jake anymore. "Where's your sister?" I asked, panic rising. "She said she forgot her book in the library," Jake replied. I ran downstairs, Elaine right behind me. The library door was closed, though I was sure we'd left it open. When I pushed it open, Emma was standing at the desk, her hand poised over the open register. "Emma!" I shouted. She turned to me, her eyes unfocused. "They want me to sign," she said in a flat voice that didn't sound like her at all. "They're under the water waiting." I grabbed her hand before she could write anything. Her fingers were icy cold. "They said once I sign, I'll be part of the lake forever," she continued in that same empty voice. I picked her up bodily and carried her out, despite her suddenly struggling against me. As we left the library, the floorboards began to creak and bend, as if something underneath was pushing up against them. We drove straight home that night, 4 hours with the kids asleep in the back seat, while I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us. Emma doesn't remember any of it. She has no memory of the old man, the register, or what she said in the library. But since we've been home, she's developed a fear of water. She refuses to take baths, only quick showers. And twice now, I've found her sleepwalking, standing by our backyard pond, staring into the water. Last week, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper, torn from a book. At the top of the page, in faded ink, Manitou Lodge Register, July 17, 1932. And at the bottom, in fresh blue ink, a single word in what looked like a child's handwriting: Emma. I burned the paper immediately, but this morning I found it in Emma's drawer, intact, as if it had never been destroyed. I don't know what to do. I've researched Aspen Shore Lodge and found reports of at least 3 other children who've stayed there and later drowned in unrelated accidents, all within a year of their visit. We're moving away from the water, far away. I've already put our house up for sale, and I'm never letting Emma near that lake again. But sometimes at night, I hear what sounds like water dripping in her room, though everything's dry when I check. And twice now, I've found wet footprints leading from her bed to the window. Something followed us home from Aspen Shore Lodge, and I'm terrified it's still waiting for Emma to fulfill the promise it thinks she made. Story 18. I've been driving big rigs for almost 15 years now. You think you've seen it all after that long on the road. Crazy weather, bizarre roadkill, lot lizards that would make your hair curl, and every type of sketchy warehouse from Texas to Maine. But what happened to me last August keeps me up at night, and I still can't explain it. I was between regular routes when my dispatcher Marty called with a rush job. Good money, simple pickup outside Bakersfield with delivery to Phoenix by noon the next day. Nothing unusual about that. Emergency loads are how we make our best cash in this business. Marty said it was electronics, about 8 pallets, nothing hazardous. The pickup had to happen at 3 in the morning, which was weird, but not unheard of. Companies sometimes load at odd hours to avoid traffic or because of scheduling issues. I'd been sleeping at a rest stop about 40 miles away, so I had plenty of time. I grabbed coffee at a truck stop, filled my thermos, and followed the directions Marty had sent. The GPS took me down the main highway, then onto progressively smaller roads until I was on what seemed like a service road running parallel to some railroad tracks. There were no streetlights out there, just my headlights cutting through the darkness. The coordinates led me to this warehouse sitting all by itself, maybe half a mile from the nearest building. No sign, just a number stenciled above the loading dock, 1438. One light illuminated the dock, and a single forklift was parked there. No other trucks, no yard dogs moving trailers around, just silence. Already the hairs on my arms were standing up, but I've delivered to enough pharmaceutical and tech places to know some operations keep a low profile. I backed up to the dock, set my brakes, and walked around to the loading area. A skinny guy in blue coveralls was operating the forklift. His face was gaunt, and he wouldn't look at me directly. I introduced myself, said I was there for the Phoenix load. He just nodded and handed me a clipboard with paperwork. The shipper was listed as TechServe Solutions, with a P.O. Box address in Sacramento. The receiver was Southwest Distribution Services, with another P.O. Box in Phoenix. 8 pallets of electronic equipment with a gross weight of 8,000 pounds. Standard stuff, but generic as hell. While forklift guy loaded my trailer, I tried making conversation, asked if they were always open this late. He mumbled something about special shipments and kept working. I noticed he was sweating despite the cool night air. The whole time, he never made eye contact. The loading took maybe 20 minutes. No other workers appeared. No security guard checked my credentials. Just this one nervous guy who seemed way too anxious for someone loading boring electronics. When he finished, he handed me the bill of lading. I signed it, and he placed these weird security seals on my trailer doors. Most seals are plastic or basic metal with simple numbers. These were heavy duty, made of some dull gray metal with laser-etched numbers. I took photos with my phone like I always do, just for my records. As I climbed back into my truck, I noticed a black sedan parked across the lot that hadn't been there before. Couldn't make out if anyone was inside, but the engine was running. I didn't stick around to find out. About 20 miles down the road, I noticed my truck was pulling harder than it should. I've hauled 8,000 pounds plenty of times, and my Peterbilt shouldn't have been straining like that. The fuel consumption was way off too. I started doing mental calculations. Either my truck had suddenly developed mechanical issues, or my load was a lot heavier than 8,000 pounds. I pulled into a rest area about an hour into the drive to check things out. First, I called Marty to confirm the details. He sounded groggy, and I realized it was only about 4:30 in the morning. "What Bakersfield pickup?" he asked. "You're supposed to be deadheading to Flagstaff tomorrow for the Walmart load." I explained about his call earlier, but he had no recollection of it. Said he'd been asleep since 10. I described the warehouse, the paperwork, everything. "Rick, I didn't book you for anything near Bakersfield, and there's no record of it in the system." My stomach dropped. I thanked him and hung up, then pulled out the bill of lading. The phone number for TechServe was printed at the top, so I called it. Disconnected. I tried looking up the warehouse address on Google Maps, but according to the map, there was nothing at those coordinates except empty land. I walked around to the back of my trailer and checked the seals. The numbers didn't match what was on my paperwork, not even close. The paper said 89057 and 89058, but the seals read XR7033 and XR7034. I took new photos and compared them to the ones I'd taken at the warehouse. Same seals, different numbers. That's not possible. By this point, I was seriously considering dropping the trailer and getting the hell out of there. But abandoning a trailer is a huge deal in trucking. You can lose your job, your license, everything. And what if I was just being paranoid? Maybe Marty was confused. Maybe I'd misread the paperwork earlier. I decided to check the load myself. I know it breaks protocol to open sealed trailers, but something was very wrong here. I got my bolt cutters from the side compartment and snapped the seals. The trailer was packed with pallets wrapped in black plastic, not the clear wrap most shipments use. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see that whatever was under the wrap wasn't box-shaped like electronics would be. The shapes were irregular, almost organic-looking. I pulled at the edge of the plastic on one pallet. The smell hit me immediately. Chemical, but with something else underneath. Something that reminded me of the time I found a dead raccoon under my porch. I gagged and stepped back. Whatever this was, it wasn't electronics. I didn't unwrap it further. Some part of my brain was screaming not to look, that seeing what was inside would make this real in a way I couldn't handle. Instead, I took more photos, closed the trailer doors, and sat in my cab trying to decide what to do. After about 10 minutes, I called the highway patrol. I figured this was either some kind of drug shipment or something else illegal, and I wanted to cover myself. The dispatcher said they'd send an officer to my location. While waiting, I tried researching TechServe Solutions and Southwest Distribution. Nothing came up except generic business listings with no details. I also searched for the warehouse address again and found something interesting. A news article from 5 years ago about a property seizure by federal authorities. The article was vague, mentioning only illegal imports and potential biohazards, but the location matched. The highway patrol officer arrived about 30 minutes later. Officer Brennan was professional but obviously tired of dealing with paranoid truckers. I explained the situation, showed him the conflicting paperwork, and told him about the strange smell. "Let's take a look," he said. I led him to the back of the trailer and opened the doors. The pallets were still there, but they weren't wrapped in black plastic anymore. They were standard shipping boxes on wooden pallets, wrapped in clear plastic. The label on the side clearly read, "Refurbished computer monitors." Brennan looked at me sideways. "This what you're concerned about?" I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I stammered that it wasn't what had been there before, that something had changed. He asked if I'd been getting enough sleep. I showed him the photos on my phone, but they now showed exactly what was in the trailer, regular boxes with clear wrap. The broken seals in my hand had changed too, standard plastic seals with the numbers matching my paperwork. Brennan checked the bill of lading, made a call to verify the receiver, and told me everything seemed in order. He advised me to get some rest at the next truck stop before continuing. I nodded, thanked him, and he left. I sat in my cab for nearly an hour, questioning my sanity. The load now weighed exactly what the paperwork said it should. My truck was running normally. Everything was by the book. I completed the delivery to Phoenix the next morning. Southwest Distribution turned out to be a legitimate electronics recycling facility. The receiving manager checked the load, signed off on it, and his workers unloaded the trailer efficiently. Nobody acted strange. Nobody avoided eye contact. It was a totally normal delivery. After dropping the trailer, I drove to a truck stop and spent hours researching. I found an obscure forum where other truckers had posted similar experiences, mysterious pickups, loads that seemed to change, warehouses that shouldn't exist. One driver described picking up from a facility in Nevada that disappeared when he drove back to verify its location. Another mentioned security seals that changed numbers. They all had one thing in common: electronic shipments that didn't seem right. It's been 4 months since that night. I requested a different route, and Marty didn't ask questions. Last week, I got curious and drove my personal vehicle back to where that warehouse should have been. There was nothing there but an empty concrete pad with weeds growing through the cracks. A faded sign warned about trespassing on federal property. I still don't know what I was hauling that night. I don't know who called me pretending to be Marty, or how they got access to our dispatch system. I don't know how the load changed while I waited for the highway patrol, or how the photos on my phone changed too. What I do know is that our highways are the perfect place to hide things in plain sight. Thousands of trucks moving millions of tons of cargo every day, most of it never inspected. Most drivers never questioning what's in their trailer. The perfect system for moving things that nobody's supposed to see, or things that can change when someone gets too curious. I've thought about quitting, but this is the only job I know, so I keep driving, but I've made some changes. I don't take last-minute loads anymore. I don't do pickups at odd hours. And I always verify the shipper before I back up to their dock. Sometimes when I'm driving at night, I'll see a warehouse in the middle of nowhere with a single light on, and I wonder how many other drivers have unknowingly carried cargo that wasn't supposed to exist. How many others have glimpsed something they weren't meant to see, only to have reality shift around them when they tried to prove it.